republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the August 26th special meeting of the Board of Commissioners. First, I would like to announce that we're going to change the order of the agenda ever so slightly at the end. We're going to have our discussion on items number 9 and 10 involving our fund balance allocation and the $8 million business privilege tax before we talk about our stormwater, have the hearing on our stormwater fee proposed program. So I'm moving 9 and 10 before 7. Next, I would like to announce that we had an executive session immediately preceding this meeting on August 26th, and all commissioners were present, and we discussed matters of real estate, litigation, and personnel. Next, I would like to announce that we have some vacancies on 2 of our boards. One is the Board of Health, and the other is the Civil Service Commission. If you are interested in serving on either of these boards, please send your resume to our Township Manager, Bob Zinkowski, and his email address is on the website. Next, we have an update from the Comprehensive Plan Implementation Committee. I see Cheryl Tamola in the audience, who is going to come and give us that update.
Good evening. Okay. The update is that earlier this year, we were approached by the township manager in a meeting that he and I had, giving feedback from you that it was time to start the ball rolling for a new comprehensive plan, which jives with what the municipality's planning code says. To that end, at our meeting in June, we discussed this and decided, and Bob and I had, Mr. Zinkowski and I discussed this also, that what we would like to see this time with the comprehensive plan, each time we try to bring people in to participate and understand what the land use planning process is and get some buy-in from the community. This time we decided to have a kind of tutorial about what the land use plan means, what it does, what it can do for you, and where it fits into our government organization. And we thought the best place to start with that would be the boards and commissions that have to do with land use planning in the township. To that end, in this autumn, I think in October, probably in October, we're going to have Dorothy Ives Dewey, who is on the implementation committee, make a presentation. She teaches land use planning at Westchester University, so it seemed like a really good fit. So that's our plan now. We also have divided up the tasks. Each of our members has taken one of the chapters of the comprehensive plan to study it in depth and really try to bolster their knowledge and what is said in the comprehensive plan for when we approach it. We'd like to have them do outreach also and have separate committees as well as their input into what the comprehensive plan will say in the future.
When did you say the presentation would be? Did you say November?
We haven't picked a date yet,
Okay.
but I gave Mr. Zinkowski a
This
series
fall,
of dates that in October, pretty much, that Dottie would be available to do this. And she's very enthusiastic about it because she loves people learning what exactly this means.
Okay, great.
Okay?
That sounds great.
All right.
Does
Any other
anyone have
questions?
Any questions? Or? No?
Okay, good.
Well, thank you very much for
Thank
coming
you.
in and giving us the update, and we look
Sure.
forward to that presentation. Next, we have our consent agenda. Again, these are items that are very perfunctory in nature, do not require a debate or discussion, and really are quite as is. We give an opportunity for our board members or for the public to pull anything out of this consent agenda if someone feels that something deserves a little discussion. And I'm going to give that opportunity now, first to my colleagues on the board. Would anybody like to pull anything? And would anybody from the public like to pull anything out of the consent agenda?
Move the approval of the consent agenda.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The consent agenda passes 7-0. Next, we move on to the Ordinance 2013-14 for adoption, amending Chapter 115. Now, this falls under our Board of Health. So I'm going to ask Commissioner Nagel to take this.
Well, I'll move the introduction, and once we have a second, then I would like to make some
I'll second it.
revisions.
Well, it's the adoption, not an introduction.
Okay, moved and seconded. I would like to suggest the final changes based on what we've been, the feedback we've been getting. First of all, definition of owner on page 2. We'll delete or regularly feeds, and then we'll place the or in front of harbors. We need to add a definition of TNR. And then back in 115.9, cats at large, we will change this to say, any feeding of a feral cat is to be discouraged. Feeding of a feral cat is discouraged unless part of a township TNR program. I guess we could actually strike that first sentence. So it would just be feeding of a feral cat.
But would you consider saying organized TNR and not township TNR?
Oh, I didn't say, I said township recognized.
Let's just leave organized
Okay.
TNR.
Okay,
Leave the township out of it.
fine.
We also need some people are doing TNR outside of organized programs, and that has to be included. So my sense is just if it's vaccinated and neutered, that's sufficient.
I would just leave it a TNR program then.
Take out the organized.
Well, I'd like to try a different approach.
Well, let me get a second on mine first, Jim.
I'll second that.
John, do you mind just sort of recapping that, please?
Yep. We ended up with feeding, and the discussion was cats at large. Feeding of a feral cat is discouraged unless part of a TNR program.
Right.
John, what section?
That's 15.15-9, John.
Okay. Just so everyone can follow what we're striking, what we're adding. So we're at 115.9.
So we're going to start with the first sentence, delete it,
Any feeding of a feral cat is to be discouraged. That would be
Period.
deleted.
right. Delete regular, capitalized feeding,
Okay.
delete everything after cat, and then add is discouraged unless part of a TNR program.
How does it read?
Feeding of a feral cat is discouraged unless part of a TNR program. It's clean.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. It's very
Okay,
clean.
well, can I speak out now? Speak up?
So that was moved and seconded?
Yes.
So that amendment's on the floor right now?
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead, Jim.
In response to the tremendous outcry we've had from members of the public, I'd like to try a different approach. The main objection to the people who have appeared before us and spent all their good time convincing us is that we would be making criminals out of people that feed feral cats by enacting, and I think what we're talking about is section 115.9. I haven't heard much of opposition in the 2 sessions we've had to the other good things about the ordinance, and there are some good things in there. I went through it today, spent some time on the entire ordinance. We have 115.7, which talks about dogs at large, 115.8, which talks about waste, dog and cat excrement, and the obligation of the owner to clean up. 115.9 is the one we were just mentioning. Then a good bit of the sections are directed towards rabies and how we can help ourselves prevent the spread of rabies within the township. There's a section on seizure of dogs at large. There's a section on property owners, animal owners having to keep their female dogs in heat on their premises. It's a good section. There's a section on noise caused by dogs. And then there's the penalty section, which is 115.18. It's a minimum of $300 per violation up to $1,000 plus costs and attorney's fees. Each day of violation is considered a separate offense. And, okay. Now, if you take a look at 115.9, it does catch more of the problem than perhaps we need to. And I say that in response to the objections I've heard from people. But what it does do, and which I hope we don't emasculate, is it prevents people from arbitrarily or casually feeding feral cats without engaging in the TNR process or program. And that's the problem that I think we, as a board, need to address and direct and try to stop. Because feral cats are a problem in this township and elsewhere. We do have people, we had a couple in this room at our August 12th meeting that were fine to talk about how they had fed this mother cat, and this cat bore litters, 2 litters for them. And that person, as far as I can remember, didn't do anything about the TNR aspect of the issue, of his and her actions. So rather than emasculate this 115.9, I would like to do the following. Make changes which will accomplish 3 things. If you regularly feed a feral cat and are making good faith efforts to trap, neuter, and release, you are not guilty of violating the ordinance. Good faith efforts, what are they? Well, it's a term of art in the law, and it would be for the finder of fact, that's the district justice, to determine if you are making good faith efforts when the citation is presented. Secondly, if you feed a feral cat and are not making good faith efforts to trap, neuter, and release, you are guilty of violating the ordinance. So the person that was here at our last meeting that was feeding the cat and not doing anything about the trapping and neutering and releasing, that person would be in violation. Now, here's another good aspect of it from the people that I think that are worried about the criminalizing conduct part of it. Even if you are not making good faith efforts, you are not in violation of the cleanup section. That's the part that says an owner must ensure that his cat, her dog, that messes on somebody else's property, they have to go there and clean it up. And if they don't, they're in violation of the ordinance. So even if you are not making good faith efforts to TNR, you're not in violation of the cleanup section and the other section that requires you to restrain females on your property who are in heat. So that's the summary, and I circulated the actual change in wording today to my fellow commissioners and to our solicitor. So, John, I would rather see us go in this direction and amend 115.9 in accordance with what I sent around today, and not disturb the definition of owner, and leave in place some aspects of enforcement.
So are you making a motion?
I would like to move the introduction of my amendment to 115.9.
And would you read the text of it so that everyone?
Yes. Any feeding of a feral cat is to be discouraged. Regular feeding of a feral cat constitutes ownership with its resultant responsibilities as outlined in this chapter, provided that no responsibility of ownership shall devolve upon a person who regularly feeds a feral cat, 1, if the person is making good faith efforts to trap, neuter, and release the animal. 2, for violation of section 115.8 pertaining to cleaning up of excrement on others' property. And 3, for violation of section 115.15 pertaining to keeping a female cat on the premises of the owner or keeper when the cat is in heat.
Okay, is there a second for that
Yes,
motion?
I'll second it. One question for
Okay.
both of you. How would a circumstance in which somebody has an individual cat, it's not part of a TNR program, how would that be affected under both those scenarios? That's a realistic situation that I think we have to address.
Well, if it's a feral cat?
Yes, meaning it's a single individual cat. Essentially, you adopt a stray that is feral. So you're not part of any recognized program, but you're doing all the things that the TNR programs do, essentially vaccinating the cat and neutering the cat.
Well, my approach doesn't require you to be part of a program to take advantage of the fact that you won't be prosecuted
Right.
if you're making good faith
So
efforts.
if you're doing the aspects of TNR, then you are covered.
Yes,
regardless of
absolutely.
whether you're part of a program.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we have two amendments on the floor. My position, I will not support the second amendment forwarded by Commissioner Higgins. My biggest problem with the ordinance as drafted is the enforcement issue. I think this is we've heard from our staff that this is very difficult, if not impossible, to enforce, and would be time-consuming and inefficient and impossible to enforce. And I can't see asking our staff to do it, to try it. And although it's a very good cause, I agree with you that we do have a problem. I don't see that the way that we had originally drafted this as making feeding ownership is the correct way to approach it because of the enforcement issues. For that reason, I think those the enforcement issues are exacerbated with Jim's amendment in that we're making judgments on good faith effort, and it just seems to be even more complicated of an enforcement decision and burden on our staff. So although I like the thinking and I like the logic behind it, again, I find a problem with the enforcement. I am in support of the amendment that John Fisher and John Nagel put forth that eliminates the ownership, feeding equals ownership aspect altogether, discourages feral cat feeding except for with a TNR program, and then keeps in place the other provisions of this draft.
That's kind of a pointless provision. It doesn't really say anything. Feeding of feral cats to be discouraged, so what happens?
Well,
It's
the point
stating the
is that
position of the
there is
township.
no way really, realistically, to enforce.
I know that, but it's like,
Well, what we're doing is we're recognizing that TNR is a useful practice, and that there are those in the community that want to do that. We're somewhat memorializing it, but we're not going to govern it. We're
All
not
right,
going to.
let's talk, at our August 12th meeting, 7-0, I think, was the vote. We all endorsed the concept of trap, neuter, and release. So we have the official imprimatur of the Township of Radnor on the program that our friends in the audience asked us to endorse. Second of all, I'd like to try to convince you, Elaine, every law, federal, state, county, or local, has enforcement problems. We don't say to our police, well, we're not going to erect that stop sign, or we're not going to give you authority to lower the speed limit from 35 to 25 because, well, speeding is so subjective. You'll have a terrible time enforcing it. So we have to come to grips with the fact that there's imperfections in what we do, there's imperfections in things laws that we pass, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't pass them. And when you have, as a possibility, a greater good or a valuable benefit, which is to control the unneutered wild cat population, I think the trade-off there militates in favor of passing the law.
I'm going to augment that a bit with much of the compliance that we get is voluntary, and we don't get that unless we have some basis in the law to ask for it. So this gives us the authority to ask, and I think the overwhelming number of people will respond favorably when we ask them. So I hear the same concerns about the difficulty of enforcing it, but similar to what Jim said, I think it's manageable and worthy of supporting.
I'd like to hear from some of our friends if you're running the meeting. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
I would like to hear from our other two commissioners first
Okay.
so that the audience can get an idea of where this is going before comment is taken. So-
Well, I just want to interject one thing. The amendment that I recommended, the way I see it working is the way a lot of our ordinance work, which is we get a complaint from a neighbor. This guy's feeding these cats and our folks go out, they talk to the person that's feeding them, they make them aware of the ordinance, They explain to them about TNR if they don't know about TNR, and they try to get them to get involved with the TNR effort. They may, in fact, find out that the cat has been taken care of. So that's the way I see it playing out. I don't think we need to get much fancier than that to accomplish our
What happens
goals.
if he, in your scenario, John, what happens if he or she absolutely refuses? There's no consequences.
Sure there is.
It says feeding of feral cats is to be discouraged.
Well, feeding, I guess let me speak to this for a moment. The feeding isn't really the issue we've had. The issue was we didn't have a mechanism to deal with a large cat colony. And I think the ordinance and the resolution we passed last meeting really goes a long way. We've come a long way. 4 years ago, I didn't even know what TNR was. I know what it is now. I think most of us do now. And we see that there's potential value for the community in that. And the whole country sees it. So the whole country is doing this. And I think, for me, the purpose of the ordinance is a communication piece, but more importantly, sets the tone for administration and staff to know what to do. They know they don't have to go out there and write a citation. They need to go out there with information and take it to the resident. I've had many residents call and say, these kittens just showed up on my lawn. I don't know what to do with them. Well, I didn't know what to do with them. So now we know what to do with them. We have many volunteers in the community that want to help with this problem. We have staff that understands that we have community people that want to help with this problem. So in some ways, I'd like to say we're addressing it, and we're coming up with a mechanism and a way to solve this problem. And it is not a big problem. That was the other issue I saw, that it was never a big problem. The reality is that it will become a big problem if we don't do anything. So I support the amendment that John and I have put forward. I want to get away from this penalization, this penalty, and get more towards encouraging the good behavior. Let's just get it done. Get it
John,
done
Well,
tonight.
it says discourage, that's not encourage, so, I mean, it
Well,
doesn't make
I guess
sense
the
what you
point is that
described.
we can write a citation, if we criminalize it, we can write a citation, and I can assure you that when that person gets over to the district court, that if that fine is $1,000, that justice will reduce that fine to something very minimal, if not eliminate it altogether. So we see this all the time with all of our citations, whether it has to do with a cat or anything else. So I'm just being realistic, pragmatic here. I want to encourage the good behavior. I don't want the ordinance to criminalize it in any way. I want to make sure that the volunteers have an opportunity. I want to make sure that the residents are aware. And I think the resolution that we have, the ordinance amendment that John has put forward, and I second, is the right one. Keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate it. Commissioner Schaefer said it well.
The simplest way is just to delete 115.9.
Well, and
Accomplish
I had
anything.
recommended that 2 years ago, because I thought it was getting too complex. But I like the new wording. I think it's good to really state it, to be
Well,
explicit.
Are we all overlooking something here? We have a Board of Health in this township. Our Board of Commissioners appoints each member of that Board of Health. We have a veterinarian on it. In the past, we've had people with masters in public health. We've had physicians, we've had dentists. I don't quite know who's on it today, but they have studied this problem. They have looked at the literature. They have looked at the problem in the township, in the county, in our neighboring county of Chester and Montgomery. And they're the ones that determined that we have a feral cat, a stray cat problem, and we have a rabies potential problem in the township. So this ordinance with section 115.9 and all the other sections that I mentioned is a product of the good work of our Board of Health. And I think when you say that we're just going to rely on the good efforts of the people that are feeding feral cats, that they won't do it, you're overlooking the fact that we have professionals find differently. And secondly, I don't think you can put yourself in the position of our district justices in Radnor who would acquit somebody of an offense or reduce a fine down to something negligible. In essence, I think what we need here is we have rogue, there are people that don't obey the law in this area of discussion and in many areas of discussion that our board will undertake. We We have people that don't obey the law, and it's those people, not the people in our audience here tonight. It's the people that have fed cats, will continue to feed cats without participating in a trap, neuter, and release program. And that's why we need a penal section in the ordinance.
Are there any other commissioners that would like to comment?
John, Elaine, and Bill, we have 4 votes, so let's move forward.
Okay, it's time for public well, is there any staff comment? I am going to call for public comment now, but I would like to point out, because that was a little confusing with 2 amendments on the floor, that you've heard from 4 commissioners, which is a majority, that are in favor of removing the language that states that feeding equals ownership, and in favor of changing the language from discouragement, simplifying the language in 115.9 that would say feeding is discouraged unless part of a TNR program. So having that in mind, you are welcome to come up and give your public comment, realizing that your advocacy doesn't need to be very zealous, if that's what you're trying to achieve. And if you're here again and you gave some statements last week, please note that we remember everything and we considered everything that we heard last week, and that does not need to be repeated again this week. And then other than that, please give your name and where you're from, and please keep your statements as short as you can. With that, I'm going to go ahead and call for public comment.
Hello, my name is Liz Holtz, and I spoke at the last meeting. I'm a staff attorney at Alley Cat Allies, and I just want to state quickly that I support Commissioner Nagel and Fisher's amendment for the reasons you all stated. Simplicity is best. We shouldn't penalize Good Samaritans. And most importantly, people who feed feral cats are not owners. And I just want to reiterate that to the Board of Commissioners. As an attorney, I agree that 115.9 feeding is discouraged. That doesn't really carry much weight. The issue Alley Cat Allies has had is the definition of ownership, which is why I really like the amendments. To save time, is it allowed for everyone to raise their hand who is in support of my position? Or, okay.
Okay, I've counted roughly 60 hands.
Okay, so we officially, Alley Cat Allies supports the Fisher-Nagel amendments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anybody else that needs to expound upon that? Great. Is there any other public comment? Go ahead.
My name is Brian McGowan. I'm the owner of Mickey and Little Mickey, who apparently somehow got the misimpression that we're not part of a TNR program. I feel like I'm talking to my kids sometimes. I thought I said this and they heard something different, so I want to clarify for the record. First of all, I do support the amendment, but I thought I made it crystal clear that when we found Mickey and Little Mickey, we did call Radnor Township immediately. We spoke to the game warden, who advised that we TNR the cats. We did TNR the cats at a cost of $2,000 to $3,000. We weren't aware that some vets offered discounts. We paid it. So I don't know, Mr. Higgins, where you got that impression. That is entirely wrong. The cats we have receipts.
I thought I heard you say that you fed them over a period of time, and then the mother came back with litters.
And then when we realized we had a problem, we called the township.
Okay.
And he suggested TNR. We took them to the veterinary in Narberth. It was like $2,500. We were glad to pay it. And we still have the cats. They have been neutered. They have a little clip in their ear to indicate that they are neutered, and they have been vaccinated.
I'm Joy McGowan. I'm the one that did it, and I was with the help of Eleanor Donahue. And I did call Kitty Cottage. I called Radnor Township. I spoke to a vet, Dr. Dieter in Narberth, took the cats. And the reason it cost so much money is because it took a while to catch. We trapped and neutered 3. 1 died shortly after. But we did trap and neuter 3, and we had to board them for 28 days. So that's why the expense was, but we did it because we worried about them, and we took care of them. And so we did do that. The reason they had kittens, it wasn't that we were ignoring them, that we were at an office, saw them walking by. We had nothing to do with it. We knew nothing about trap, neuter, and release, knew nothing about anything. Luckily, there were people like Kitty Cottage and Eleanor Donahue knew Francis Vale and the Spade Club, all these people who offered advice. So we were back, this is in 2004, we were in the dark. You know, we're at an office, we're not there at night, we didn't know what to do. So we did what the township did. The township at that time said, if you trap them, neuter them, you may release them and you may feed them, and they stay around our office. The vet also tried, one of the cats had a limp, tried to help it. So I mean, we're just trying to do the best we could. Knew nothing about this program. Weren't part of a big group, but we did. I mean, we did try.
Thank you.
We do support it. We thank you for the consideration.
Thank you very much. Is there any other public comment? All right, I'm going to go ahead and call the vote. First, okay.
Hi, my name is Joanne Fredericks, and I'm a resident of Radnor Township. Could you please repeat the Nagel-Fisher amendment, word for word, as it will appear in the ordinance? Thank you.
Commissioner Nagel, it's all you.
I can take a shot at that, Commissioner Nagel.
Okay.
Actually, there were two things that were being changed. One was the definition of owner, and that's on page 2 of the ordinance. The phrase "or regularly feeds an animal" would be struck. And then the other amendment on page 7.
No, John, an animal stays.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Keeps, and we move the "or" in front of harbors. Keeps or harbors an animal.
I stand corrected. Thank you. And then the 115.9, would read, regular feeding of a feral cat is to be discouraged unless part of a TNR program. Everything else would be struck.
So how would that affect a situation like the McGowans, who vaccinated and neutered the cat but are not part of a TNR program? Would that
I'd make the
them-
case that was a one-person TNR program.
Okay, very good. I mean, as long as that's the case.
Okay.
John Rice, you have no issue with the township interpreting that. It's the provisions of TNR, not,
If one person is doing this without part of a larger group,
Yes.
then I think that's fine.
Very
That's
good.
not an issue.
All right, is there any other public comment?
I'm Eleanor Donahue with Francis Vale and Radnor. I was not clear on that very point that you just brought up, that TNR can easily be one person, trap, neutering, returning. That is a formal program. There is no TNR organization. It's just
Right.
me taking care of the cats that appeared at the back door. And the other thing, perhaps I'm not completely clear on what the provisions of the current amendments are. The fines, do they remain of up to $1,000 a day? I make the comparison that seems so totally unfair. That is, drunk driving in Pennsylvania only gets the driver a $300 fine. To think that somebody who feeds a hungry cat deserves a $1,000 a day fine seems totally disproportionate.
Well, we've taken that out.
I wonder if we can,
so-
you've taken that out.
Well, no, not the fine. We've taken the feeding the cat portion out. So that's
okay,
not
so
going to
that's
happen anymore.
covered. Okay, we'll hope for the best.
Okay. All right, is there any
John,
other?
did you have a definition of TNR that you're?
Is
Can
there
we-
any other public comment?
so, but can we, I think the definition has to have the word vaccinate in it to make this work, to meet the original intent of the Board of Health. So trap, neuter, vaccinate, return.
Trap, neuter, release, and then we'll go into define what constitutes that.
Okay,
Neutering,
so
vaccinated.
then part
Trap,
of this
neuter,
amendment will be that in the
vaccine.
definition of TNR that John Rice is going to add.
Yes.
The definition will include the word vaccinate or the concept of
Yeah,
vaccination as
because
part
that
of
was
it.
in one of the handouts we got. I forget which group gave it to us. So we'll use that.
Right, so that will expressly be the case, John Rice, that it will include vaccination.
Yes.
in
'Cause
the
that's really
definition of
the goal.
TNR. Pardon?
That really is the goal.
Yes.
Okay. Any other public comment? I'm going to go ahead and call a vote. We first will vote on the second amendment that was offered by Commissioner Jim Higgins and seconded by Don Curley. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion fails 2-5. with Commissioners Kevin Higgins and Jim Higgins supporting, and everyone else opposing. Now the First Amendment. So this is the ordinance as amended by the amendment of Commissioner Nagel and seconded by Commissioner Fisher. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion passes 5-2 with Commissioners Kevin Higgins and Jim Higgins opposing. All right, we're done. We're done.
Now we have to vote on the main menu.
No, I should put it all
No,
together.
'cause all right, next we are moving on to, well, the amendment was to the draft of the ordinance. His amendment was the ordinance as amended.
Yeah,
We can't do it this way. We
Okay.
have
I think
to,
he's
we
right.
have to have Mr. Nagel's amendment isolated,
Okay,
so we can vote against it. And then I want to vote in favor of the entire ordinance.
with his amendments?
With the amendment in it, yes.
We can do another vote, fine. All right, so I'll call a vote on the amended ordinance.
Is there discussion on that?
No.
No,
Well,
Need a-
before there should be, before a final vote.
no, because our public comment was on all of them together.
all discussion if you want.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion passes 6-1 with Kevin Higgins opposing. Is that clear?
Thank you.
Okay. All right, next we have a motion to appoint a hearing officer in the density modification application for conditional use by the owners of Ardrossan. And I'm going to ask our solicitor, John Rice, to explain what this is all about, and then to introduce our potential hearing officer to us and explain a little bit about him.
Okay. As the board is aware, there were 2 conditional use applications filed in the past couple weeks under the township's zoning ordinance for density modification plans. Under the township's zoning ordinance, anyone that wants to develop a piece of ground in that zoning district for density modification has to, before they go to land development, has to have a conditional use hearing and an approval. The Ardrossan tract, as I think most people in the township are aware, the township has had some desire to preserve a part of that, and in order to have a independent hearing officer hear the conditional use aspects of this, which deals with the tract as a whole, the municipality's planning code gives the option to a township to appoint a hearing officer to basically sit as a sort of the way a zoning hearing board sits and to take testimony on the conditional use applications. So to that end, in looking for a hearing officer, an experienced hearing officer that would be able to conduct these hearings, you have a proposal from William J. Bola, who's an attorney with a vast amount of experience sitting as zoning hearing board solicitor, building code solicitor, borough solicitor throughout southeast Pennsylvania. You have a August 12th proposal in front of Mr. Bola to be the hearing officer for these conditional uses at an hourly rate of $195 an hour. I'm familiar with Mr. Bola. He has handled many contentious and non-contentious hearings, many large development hearings that came in front of him or in front of a zoning hearing board involving large developments. There'll be a lot of interest in these conditional use applications, and he in effect would sit as the hearing officer, render the decision per the municipality's planning code on the applicant's conditional use application. So that's what's in front of the board. Mr. Bola, if he's appointed, would then be tasked with the job of scheduling hearings with the township and the applicant and the applicant's counsel. And there's an obligation to begin hearings within 60 days of the application, which I think runs us through the end of September. So once he's appointed, he would have to coordinate that, township staff, make sure the proper advertising is done, notices, if required, be posted, the usual hearing procedures.
Just a logistical question. If the conflict ceased to exist and this board, and we've already appointed this hearing officer, and this board did not pursue an acquisition simultaneously, we could step back in as the hearing body,
Correct.
correct? At any point, really?
Well, once the hearing commences, I think it would be a little bit
Okay.
difficult. So you have until, unless there's an extension to begin, you know, the initiation of the hearings.
Okay.
But you have until at least then to make that decision and change your mind, if you choose to do that.
Okay, I need a motion for this appointment.
I'll move the approval.
Second?
I'll second it. John, I've gone through the density modification statute or ordinance, and I just have a question on nomenclature. I understand density modification. What is the purpose of having the tag conditional use accompany the application for rezoning? Why both? Is there such a thing as a non-conditional use?
Yeah, under Pennsylvania zoning law, and I would direct you to the municipality's planning code, which really spells out the types of approvals that the state requires all municipalities to follow. You have, for any particular use, you have a use that's permitted by right, which means there's no extra zoning hearing board or governing body hearings, and someone can file an application under your building zoning code and proceed, for example, to build a single-family dwelling on a single lot. That would be one house on one lot. There's a zoning permit, the sign off by Kevin, building permit, sign off, and they proceed. Once you get beyond, into larger types of developments, be it multifamily housing, something like this, commercial, industrial, residential, then the code permits municipalities to provide in their ordinance additional criteria to examine a particular application. So you have a choice then. You can say, this particular use, we would like the zoning hearing board to hear this, and that would be a special exception. And you have provisions in the MPC and in your zoning ordinance to file that application, to go to the zoning hearing board, and to present testimony in support of that project, which would be approved by special exception. This is very similar. Conditional use is virtually identical to what a special exception is, except the governing body is the hearing board, not the zoning hearing board. And the governing body has the option of appointing a hearing officer, as does the zoning hearing board in a special exception. They can appoint a hearing officer in a special exception application. So and then you have variances, which are zoning hearing board applications where 115 Stratford asked for variances, and we need to talk a little bit about that once you make a decision on this one. But that was a variance application, and that's a whole different set of criteria under the MPC and under your zoning ordinance. So it's a legislative judgment that when density modification was put into the Radnor Township zoning ordinance, that board said, we like this use, but we want to have some additional scrutiny to it, and we're going to make it permitted only by conditional use.
Do we have any other commissioner comment? Any staff comments on this? Any public comment? All right, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Passes 7-0. Next, we have another appointment of a hearing officer. This time it's for a conflict on a tax appeal. And Bill White, I'm going to ask you to give us a little background on this and introduce us to who this hearing officer might be.
Sure, and I'll start by apologizing for not getting it in the board packets. We didn't get the engagement letter from the proposed hearing officer until the packets had already gone out. What we're looking at here is, by way of process, is a business privilege and mercantile tax audit cases in which an assessment is filed. The taxpayer has the opportunity to file an appeal. The conflict hearing officer then hears that appeal and issues an opinion or a judgment based on the facts as they hear them. And then either side has the opportunity then to appeal to the courts from there. In this specific case, the township does have a hearing officer in place already that was appointed by the board some years ago. And there's no issues with that person. It's just what we're looking at here is a backup in the event that either of the conflict hearing officers have a conflict on a particular business that is being assessed. So what we're proposing here is Stephen Harris from Harris & Harris at a rate of $150 per hour, which is consistent with what the other hearing officer charges. This particular attorney was recommended to us by Solicitor Rice, and that's based on his experience as a solicitor in other municipalities and his familiarity with the Act 511 laws. So if the board is okay, we would ask that Mr. Harris be appointed as a conflict hearing officer in a backup role for the township.
Okay, I need a motion for that.
So move.
Second.
Is there any commissioner comment or questions? Any further staff comment? Any public comment? All those in favor say aye.
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 All right, passes 7-0.
Madam President, just
Yes.
while we're on the topic of hearings, you do have 115 Stratford conditional use application was also filed. So and this board would hear that application. So you need to think about next month. I don't think you need to do it tonight, but setting the date for that, either September 9th or special hearing night, or maybe your second meeting in September, because the clock's running on that one too.
And this is the conditional hearing because they are now allowed to use density modification on their
Zoning
parcel.
hearing board granted
Right,
that
okay.
variance that permitted them to file that. So it comes in front of you
Okay.
as a hearing board.
Well, what's the manager's recommendation on a date?
Recommendation would be the September 9th meeting.
To set a hearing.
Correct.
Okay.
So move.
Well, I don't think we need to move that.
Motion? You move.
No, we'll just put it on the agenda we're just setting a date on the 9th. All right, moving along, we're going to now jump to 9 and 10 before we get to the stormwater, because some of the things we discuss in 9 and 10 may have some bearing on our discussion of the stormwater fee. Number 9 is a discussion of the 2013-2014 proposed fund balance allocation. Bill White, I'm going to ask you again to give us a little background on this and where we are.
By way of history, and I'm going to summarize the legislative summary that was in the packets. Back in December of 2011, the board adopted a resolution assigning priorities on the distribution of any excess general fund balance that may occur in 2011 and 12. Excess is defined within our fund balance policy that establishes a 15% of general fund expenditures. From 0 up to 15% is within the fund balance policy. Anything in excess of 15% of general fund expenditures would be considered excess, and then was then distributed based on the priorities of Resolution 2011-156. So that resolution was for 2 years, for 2011 and 12. As we proceed forward, this particular item's on tonight's agenda to get the conversation started about assigning a new or adopting some new replacement legislation for 13 and 14. And before I get into any of the details of what was included as far as the priorities, would recommend that prior to any formal decision by the board that these items go back in front of CARFAC and give them the opportunity to take a look at it. What you see here in front of you tonight is the work that the administration has done over the last few weeks in putting the foundation together to bring this out to the public. But we would like the opportunity to sit down with CARFAC and review these as well. So the 2011 resolution included 4 priorities, and they were based on unfunded liabilities as they existed on the balance sheet, or starting to re-implement a funding program for the township's capital program. And the 3 unfunded liabilities that were addressed were compensated absences, pension, OPEB, and then the 4th category was capital. So for each of those moving forward, there's a brief summary on where we stand today versus where we were 2 years ago. And with regard to compensated absences, that was given the highest priority back in 2011, and that was due mostly to the short-term nature of those liabilities and when they would come due. At this point, based on the amount that's been allocated towards that particular item, as well as the fact that some of the larger liabilities have been paid over the last few years, at this point, that one would be considered funded. There's enough assets to cover the liability, so I'm not sure that needs to be part of the program moving forward. Which leaves us then with the 3 others, the pension, OPEB, and the capital plan. As far as pension goes, I listed that first because, as we discussed in several special meetings and as we discussed during the budget process, given the nature of the various variables that go into funding the pension on an ongoing basis and the difficulty in matching reality with those variables, there's just a lot of risk and opportunity for variances there, which have driven up the township's unfunded liability over time, that perhaps moving forward, pension be given the highest of the priorities in any excess fund balance to help minimize fluctuations then on the MMO side, which were required by state law to fund every year. The next category we've also spent a great deal of time discussing over the last 2 years, and that's the OPEB. We know that the actuarial liability that we report in the financial statements is somewhere in the ballpark of $54 million. The actual sum of all the future obligations is more like $214 million. So the difference here with this particular item, as we've discussed, is there's not as many variables. This is a little bit easier to predict where those costs are going to be over time. So perhaps this particular item in terms of excess fund balance be next on the priority list. And then finally, the capital plan. Back when we adopted the 2013 budget, it included the reintroduction of a 5-year capital program along with a funding commitment over those 5 years. For 2013, we were fortunate enough, based on the board's action of allocating other fund balances from 11 and 12, we were able to fund this year's program with those excesses. And as we'll discuss with the next item on tonight's agenda, the possibility of funding the 14 portion of the capital plan with the business privilege tax settlement. So, but on an ongoing basis, year after year, the capital plan continues to be a large expenditure item that does not have any kind of dedicated millage at this point. So to the extent the township has future excess fund balances, those excesses could be used to offset how much is needed to fund the capital program. So it would seem to make sense to continue to include that as a priority. So those are the 4 items as they were 2 years ago and the updates as they exist now. I'm sure there's a whole long list of other items and funding priorities for the township, but given how these 3 particular ones appear on our balance sheet and the funding impact year over year in terms of how the board establishes the tax rates, it would seem to make sense that these 3 continue to be given priority in terms of any excess money that the township may have, those dollars going towards these 3. So again, this information is being presented tonight to get the conversation started. What we'd like to do is go back to CARFAC, step through these, and get their thoughts prior to making a recommendation on a final resolution to the board.
Okay. I just have a couple questions. There's some verbiage in here about we may choose to set up our OPEB funding under one of in the matrix that we got in June, there was one option that was $200,000 a year over, I forget how many years, 10 years or whatnot, to get us in the right position. And that would come out of general funds, I'm assuming, not this excess. And I'm just wondering, is that 200 in the 2014 budget we'll get tonight, or will be introduced to tonight?
The plan that we've discussed administratively is to introduce that as part of the 2014 budget.
Okay,
We
great.
don't have the exact numbers tonight for
Okay.
tonight's discussion, but that's the plan right now.
It is, okay,
Yes.
good, I'm glad to hear that. The capital numbers that would be recipients, the programs that would be recipients of this excess money, would that include stormwater projects or not?
No.
No.
Being that when the capital plan was discussed a year ago, and as it still exists today, is the capital plan is, for lack of a better term, its own entity, with stormwater being its own entity, keeping the tax revenues away from the stormwater to the extent possible. Now,
And
obviously,
I know we
the
had
board
had
has the
some
authority.
discussion somewhere about including stormwater as potentially one of the categories that would receive some funds. I don't really know where that went, and I don't know if any of my colleagues have any strong feelings about that, but it's something we could think about. I mean,
Well, yeah, sure, it's entirely within the board's
Right.
purview. The reason why it wasn't included in this list here is, again, to keep the separation between tax dollars, which is basically excess fund balance at the end of the year is going to be primarily made up of tax dollars.
So it's the equity issue again.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
But we did look to address that in the next topic on
Right.
tonight's agenda.
And then finally, I just don't have it in front of me. Do you remember, or can you share with us where we are now in terms of we're halfway through the year, where our 2013 excess is looking right now?
Yeah, and I'll pull this off of the July finance report, and for the full year for the general fund, it's in excess of $3 million based on a one-time revenue in the business privilege tax of about 1.5 million, and as well as about $1 million in other business privilege tax audit proceeds this year, separate of the large one that we'll discuss next. So it's,
About $3 million
again,
now.
it's, yeah, a rather
And
significant
the
amount.
timing of those business privilege checks, are they all year long, or are we done with those for the year, pretty much?
Yeah, the filing deadline and the payment deadline is the end of May, so
So that's
we
what we're getting.
we
for
are
business
substantially done
Okay.
with those, yes.
All right, those are all my questions. Anybody else?
I have a couple of questions, Bill. So compensated absences, pension, and OPEB are all liabilities that need to be funded. And you've indicated that you're comfortable that the previously designated fund balances are sufficient for the compensated absences, so your proposal is not to put anything more there. Is that accurate?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, and then you're proposing to put additional funds aside to deal with these historical unfunded liabilities associated with the pension and OPEB. Am I correct in processing it that way?
Yes, that is correct.
And then the capital plan are essentially deferred investments that, depending upon how our budget numbers play out during the year, we either slow down or potentially accelerate some of those things. And because we've had a few unanticipated positive things on the revenue side, you're suggesting that we, in this case, are accelerating and funding some of these things. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm okay with what you're proposing.
One other note to add to that is, our current fund balance allocation talks about this to some extent as matching one-time revenues with more of one-time or long-term related expenses. And it could be argued that excess fund balances should be treated as one-time or unusual revenues. Then if you're matching those with expenses, then capital falls into that category as well.
Bill, oh, Do you want to go?
One thought that for the board to decide if they want the CARFAC to evaluate this, but I would consider some kind of sinking fund approach instead of putting the money directly into the pension fund. And part of what I think we need to consider is the impact that putting it directly into the pension fund might have on the actuarial evaluation, and whether we're tying our hands in that it's going to make our actuarial situation look better, and it's going to adversely affect us in negotiation. So perhaps a sinking fund approach is better. I don't know if it is or it isn't, but it's worth hearing CARFAC tell us. And then my sense on whether stormwater should be part of it is stormwater is an element of capital. If we want to divert capital towards stormwater, that's fine. But my sense is this category of 3, pension, OPEB, and capital, is the way that it should be presented to CARFAC.
Bill, the compensated absence decline is, can you explain that? Is that because of through attrition, we're losing employees and we're paying them for the leave they didn't take? And as that number declines, then our liability declines?
That's one of the factors that would cause it to decline, yes. And there were a couple large ones since 2008.
Okay. Under pension, you make some statements here that are interesting. The unfunded actuarial accrued liability has increased up to $24.9 million. Consequently, the township's annual minimum municipal obligation will increase to cover the increased amortization of the unfunded liability by $627,328. What's that all about? Why are we looking at those bad numbers?
What's being discussed there is the amortization piece of our MMO. So if you remember back to the MMO formula.
Which is a state law requirement. We have to
Yes.
contribute a minimum amount every
Yes.
year.
And it's, the calculation criteria is actually in our pension actuarial updates, that in our case, Mackinac Benefits does, basically puts the formula together, we plug in the payroll piece of it, and the calculations run through. But the MMO is made up of the normal cost, which is the current year's portion of the future pension obligations. And then if you have an unfunded actuarial liability, that unfunded piece is then amortized over, in our case, 20 years. So the amortization piece, which is being discussed in this paragraph, is going up by the $627,000 based on the unfunded piece of the liability increasing from the last actuarial valuation, which was dated January 1, 2011. The most recent one was dated 1/1/13, but we got it on Tuesday or Wednesday of last week, actually right when I was typing this, so I wanted to include the information as I had it.
And the next sentence, I don't think this is anything new, but I'll read it. Additionally, the assumptions used in funding the pensions carry more risk than any other of these long-term liabilities. Why is that?
Well, the pension includes trying to predict today what the future benefit will be for an employee, which could span up to 25, 30 years. So there's risk associated with being accurate on that assumption. And then the other major assumption well, there's a couple major ones, but another major one that we've spent a lot of time discussing is the assumed rate of return that the assets get. So if the actual return is less than what is assumed, you have a negative variance there. If it's greater than, you have a positive variance. And then some other ones that you don't necessarily think about during the renewal, but have a major impact on the pension funding status are disability retirements. To the extent if somebody who is younger gets a disability retirement, the township and the employee haven't had the full span of that career to invest the normal cost into that plan, the township is hit with that immediately upon the disabilities. So those by themselves cause an immediate large increase in your unfunded liability. And it's difficult to really plan for that outside of using history as some sort of barometer for what may happen in the future, which for those kind of injuries, you just never know. But those have a significant impact on the unfunded liability.
And for the reasons you've discussed, you're saying we should put the most emphasis on funding pensions.
That's based on the numbers I've seen for 3 years here. I think that would be a prudent way to go. As time goes on, to the extent excess fund balances by the township are going to help supplement the MMO. That would be in addition to the MMO. In the future, that's going to help smooth out major fluctuations when new actuarial updates are issued. Whereas if we did nothing over time, we're subject to those large swings in MMO dollars based on whenever these actuarial reports come out. So this will just help supplement the fund and help smooth those out.
Thank you.
Bill, just two quick questions. The $627K increase on the pension MMO, that's in addition to the base payment that we were making already.
Yeah, that's just
Correct.
the increase on the amortization.
That's just the
piece.
increase?
Yes.
What's the total going to look like, about?
The preliminary estimates for 14 is just shy of 4.2 million.
Okay.
And that's the township's gross cost. We get about $500,000 in state aid that will help offset that.
Okay, and then on the OPEB, if we assume the $200,000 additional per year, that's compounding, right? So I assume at the end of 10 years, we will be putting in an additional $2 million in per year?
Yes, and if you recall that, I think that was June, what we're doing is compounding that up to get to the full arc in 10 years, as calculated by the actuarial.
Okay. And this starts to sound like a pretty good chunk of our tax revenue, if you talk about real estate tax. At
Yes,
the end of
sir.
10 years, could be 50, 60, 70% of our tax revenue.
Just the real estate tax?
Yeah, just real estate.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, thanks.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments? So in terms of timing, CARFAC will look at this, but we'll have a policy to consider before, in context of the budget discussion.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for your work on this. It's very helpful, and we look forward to hearing from CARFAC on their opinion. All right, next we have a related issue, which is a discussion of what to do with the $8 million tax settlement that we received. And again, we have a memo from our finance department. And Bill, if you want to give us a little background on what's being proposed.
Sure. If you recall back on July 8th, the board entered into a settlement agreement with a particular tax case. The township, as part of that settlement agreement, received a lump sum revenue of $8 million. So rather than treating this in a similar fashion as the excess fund balance that we just discussed, that would be more along the lines of normal operations, this being a one-time large lump sum of money, it seemed to make sense to have a separate discussion on how we would like to proceed in investing these funds. And similar to the excess fund balance policy, this is another one that we would recommend sending to CARFAC and have them review as well. They're aware of the settlement, but just like the board is, this is the first time they're seeing this too, and I know they've expressed interest on making sure they're part of the process. So, and we absolutely agree on making sure that they have their input on this as well.
So Bill, I have a couple of questions. Let me start with the operational efficiency project. It says finance, community development, and recreation. Is that, I read this as maybe that was what you were limiting the software to, or is it really the whole township operation?
To the extent it's feasible, we would like it to be as much of the township operation as possible. It's just, when you start getting into police software, you run into some difficulties with access and state regulations on what's available.
But you basically want to do your point, which I didn't interpret accurately until you just described it, is to do as much as you can within the constraints of the police department and the laws.
Yes.
Okay, I didn't interpret it that way. I thought you were doing it, taking the, 3 sections that are significant, but just biting those off and dealing with the others later, because it just seems to me that would make more sense to do it all at once and make the one upfront investment. The second one that I need clarification on is the three I's. Are you proposing we spend $1 million on the Willows?
Yeah, the amount that is included there would be an investment into the Willows as part of the project that was discussed over the summer to help offset the risk that.
But we're spending $1 million cash, is that what your proposal is?
That would be the proposal, yes, on the public portion of the improvements that are, as of now, built into the proposal made by the operator.
So can you go over what those are? That's the water line and.
Yeah, it hasn't been nailed down specifically, but generally speaking, it's the water line, it's the roads, it's everything leading up to the mansion itself.
So we're not giving him we're not subsidizing him to $1 million that he's advantaged relative to the other proposal.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Technically, Madam President, it wouldn't be because the other proposer did not propose any improvements to the public side, which is the roads, the bridge, the parking lots. This is something that the township would take this on, as the board had asked to reduce the liability to the township. The risk part of the proposal.
But it seems to me that, again, I thought, again, people voted differently, but I thought the second proposal was responsive to what we put out, and this proposal came back with something that wasn't responsive. We voted for it, and now we're backfilling the risk that was there when we voted for it, when the better thing and more appropriate thing that should have been to lay out that we were going to put $1 million into it and have both parties make the proposal on the basis of the same information. It looks like we're doubling back on this to me.
Basically, that was under the direction of the board to try to eliminate the risk. So really, if you look at it, the second proposer was not putting any investment into the roads, the water line, the parking areas. So actually, this brings the other proposal back to what the board wanted, is to eliminate any risk. So if the operator died, went out of business, that there was no risk still with the township with actually taking on debt.
Well, I think we should have laid this out in front and had both proposals made on the same basis, Bob.
Well, I want to clarify, so the capital investment in the Willows, though, just to clarify again, is all the public area, not the building, which was not part of our original request for proposals to begin with,
That's
right?
correct.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Are you finished, Kevin?
But the party that we tentatively awarded the contract to, did have in their proposal, I believe, the upgrades to the water line and the roads.
On their own volition, they put that in there.
Yeah. And so the other bidder chose not to offer that as an extra. And we took that, and the analysis I think we did as a board was that a lot of things have to happen before our guarantee would ever be called. The revenues from the catering operation would have to decline sufficiently far over a fairly long period of time where to force the contractor to default on the notes that he's going to sign. Then the money that we would have placed in escrow, I think we said 1.5 to 2 years of revenue would be put aside to protect us if this person did go into receivership or bankruptcy. So we'd have 2 years to find a alternative contractor, and then ultimately our guarantee would be called. So it is Kevin's point is maybe we don't need to go with this input into the Willows, the $1 million.
We would have to put that in anyhow for the water line,
Yeah.
regardless of either one. I think what it was is the premise was that the board's concern was actually backing the debt on behalf of the one proposal. Is this way the township would take care of its real estate, and then the $3 million they would go and borrow on their own, away from any backing of the township. So if they defaulted, the owner died, then the township would have a fully improved.
Yeah, but now he's not
Facility.
borrowing 4, is what you just said he's borrowing.
Pardon?
He said now he's borrowing 3 instead of the 4.
And we're not guaranteeing
Well, but the
it
board
any
did,
longer.
right, exactly.
We're not guaranteed because we paid it. We more than guaranteed
No, we're
it.
not
We paid it.
guaranteeing the $4 million, which means that's the building improvements.
The $1 million is basically the cost of us avoiding the risk that we perceived. That simple.
I understand exactly what it is. I'm paying $1 million for something that I may or may not have to pay later. If it works out, I don't have to pay it, but now I'm basically paying it. It just seemed, again, look, people can vote what they
Well,
want. It just
but
seems
it's
to me
it's investment into our property.
but we went out under one set of premises and are now changing the facts, changing the rules after the game is over.
But Kevin, the board didn't like it the first time, so now we've gone back and addressed that concern that the board
I
had.
didn't like it the first time either.
Okay.
I voted against Conroy, if you remember.
All right, is there any other comments about the
Yeah, I have one
fund
question.
allocation?
Why not just have this allocation be the same as the allocation for the previous item that we discussed? Question to Bill.
Well, I think, as you can see in the numbers, there's some similarities in terms of the priorities. The thought, at least administratively, when we were taking a look at it, is being that this is one-time money, that there's the opportunity to put some investment back in to certain projects immediately that would probably otherwise either not be invested in or would take a significant amount of time, seem to make sense. So we can get some sort of immediate, return's kind of a bad word, but some people can see improvements going on immediately based on these dollars. Specifically with the stormwater, that particular line item came out of the discussions we've had over the last 2 months in an effort to seed the capital portion of that program at the outset so we can get moving with some of the capital programs there in an effort to keep the rate lower and avoid issuing any kind of debt. So that particular item is kind of it's a one-time type of seeding transaction which doesn't fit with the excess fund balance policy on an ongoing basis. And then with regard to the operational efficiency projects, the software and the kiosks is an opportunity to get going on projects that would be difficult to fund with just normal tax dollars at any given time. So that's why those were included here.
I just want to call out that in this proposed allocation, there's $1.23 million for the stormwater capital, which in the next discussion we have, we'll talk through about how that might affect the program and the fee. But I want to just mention, we've had some feedback from residents. Well, why wouldn't you just take the whole $8 million and put it towards the stormwater so that we don't have to deal with this whole fee program and structure? And that we've heard that from a few people. And it sounds simple and easy and, forget the fee. We'll just take this manna from heaven and get rid of that problem. The problem with that is that the attraction of the fee system is that it's equitable and it's charging people for what they're using, for how they're contributing to the problem. And it's not burdening the taxpayers with obligations that non-taxpayers are occurring. If you took this $8 million and you put it all towards the stormwater, you're now burdening our all of this other money that's going towards other things that come out of our general fund would continue to come out of our general fund. So all you'd be doing is shifting the burden back on the taxpayers, and inequitably, the taxpayers are in essence funding the stormwater program for those people who are using it and not paying for it. And that's why, although it's tempting in its beautiful simplicity to just take that $8 million and put it towards this big problem we have, it defeats the whole equity goal of the fee system that we're striving to achieve. So I just wanted to address that because it's come up more than once.
That's very well put. If you have any doubts as to the fairness question, just take a walk or a ride or on bike or vehicle and look at our colleges, our schools, and our churches, our mosques, our synagogues, and check out how much impervious ground they have around their buildings, including their rooftops. And imagine that all the water that comes off of those surfaces goes somewhere and ends up with other water and causes flooding throughout the township. Under the scheme that we're thinking of passing, and I hope it's at the next meeting, we will be able to charge those institutions a modest fee per parcel for the privilege of dumping their water into our waterways, our watercourses, or find a way of holding it on site and attenuating the problem. Although that part of the scheme will come later, the part about holding it on site and getting credit for that. So, and secondly, I'm happy to say that, as Elaine pointed out, we do have $1,230,000 that's going to be put into this fund for stormwater management, which, as a result of this tax settlement, we would not have otherwise had. And that will get us moving ahead much more quickly on our stormwater attenuation program than it would if we just had to wait until all the revenue comes in from the stormwater fee that we hope to enact at our next meeting.
I'd like to add to that, the tax settlement is making up for non-compliance over a long period of time. And I support dividing this lump sum into more categories rather than less, because in fact, all of those categories were shortchanged over that period of time. So, and in particular, the pension, OPEB, capital, and the operational efficiency projects. I did want to point out that right now the capital program allocation is about 33.7%, and if we were to take out the willows, it would drop to 20%, and put it more in line with the pension. And you could imagine that money going into OPEB or some other category. So I certainly support allocating it into as many areas that have liability as we can.
Okay, do we have any other comments on this? Again, I want to say thank you to Bill for working on this, and we look forward to hearing what CARFAC has to say about this proposed structure. And I'm sure this will be coming back in the next month or two for final vote, final opinion and discussion. All right.
Madam President, if I may just briefly, just I think with what you talked about, the previous excess fund balance, and with this, I know the board really should be recognized for the efforts you've made to start addressing a lot of these issues, pension, OPEB, to bring those out, to start putting funds towards those capital equipment. The shift the board has made away from taking 20-year bonds, 30-year bonds to buy police cars that have a life of 4 or 5 years now, to put money aside for those. So really, I just want to recognize the board for and appreciate all your efforts in this area, because there has been a lot of progress. The compensated leave balances has been addressed and funded now, and I think that the board does deserve a lot of recognition in this area, and we thank you. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you, and not that anyone's counting, but if you were, so 2011, 2012, and this is $13 million in total towards our unfunded liabilities so far. And that doesn't count whatever we get for 2013, which now is looking like $3 million. So by the end of this year, $16 million we have put towards our unfunded liabilities in the last 4 years. So we will take that compliment. Thank you very much. Sarah, did you want to add to this conversation? Sure.
Sarah Pilling from Garrett Hill, and I will state up front, you know, I do have a bias about the Willows. I don't always agree with Kevin Higgins, but I agree with him tonight. I am deeply troubled with us putting $1.1 million into the Willows to help a for-profit organization. And in balance, a merely paltry $100,000 to the Kritzberg Center, whose mission as a nonprofit is to educate everybody. And I understand it's a new water line, et cetera, but it leaves me very unsettled that we are helping a for-profit business who could in a year say, I quit, I'm going out of business. The catering business is very, very risky. And it looks like we're rewarding commerce and we're not rewarding nonprofits and education. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. We have one more comment, it looks like.
Susan Stern, Newtown Square. I'm actually confused about the conversation about the 1.1 for the Willows, because if I understood it correctly, it's structured to be public improvements. If we did not have the $8 million windfall, where was the $1.1 million supposed to come from?
Well, the improvements in that, all the improvements on that park were the driving force for us trying to figure out a way to get a public-private partnership. That was the issue. We couldn't come up with all that money.
So that 1.1, if I understood the paperwork I read correctly, that $1.1 million was going to be part of the $4 million loan that the township was being asked to co-sign?
No.
Okay, so that's the part I'm confused about, is where was this 1.1?
There are some items that were in the plan that they put forth that were above and beyond what we had asked for, including the water line and paving the public parts that they weren't using, that they included in their plan. And we are now looking to fund those items that were not in the original proposal, request for proposal, but were in their original plan, fund ourselves to make it more manageable for them to get their own funding without us involved as any type of guarantee. For a more manageable, for the mansion itself, without doing the public park.
Okay, I think I understand that.
Does that make sense?
Yes. The other piece that it's minor in terms of the dollars, but I did want to make a comment about it, is the plan to improve the parking meters in Radnor Township, which I actually really support that. As you're looking at that, I think it was $300,000. I would really ask you to consider doing what Lower Merion has done, which if you're going to digitize, go ahead and give 10 minutes free to the residents of Radnor Township. It's very off-putting to go into Radnor for really a very quick errand, and in the time it takes you to walk in to get your quarter for the meter, to end up with a ticket, and it feels much more friendly down in Lower Merion where you get 10 minutes free, run a quick errand. If I stay longer than 10 and I haven't put money in, fine, I get my ticket. If you're going to make the improvement, I would ask you to consider doing that kind of machine.
Duly noted.
Thank you.
Just really fast, I do support the comments made by Kevin Higgins and Sarah Pillings on the Willows, so I won't reiterate it. And I would like to say that I think that it should always be a high priority to honor our commitment to our township staff. And so I think keeping the funding of the pensions as a high priority. I know sometimes people don't like to see that in budgets. I think it's critically important that we well care for the staff that well cares for us. So I encourage you to keep that amongst your highest priorities in both of those funding considerations.
Can you give us your name and address?
Maya Van Rossum, 716 South Roberts Road.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, I think we're ready to move on now. And the next item, we're going back up to 7, which is the Ordinance 2013-15. This is a continued discussion about the potential user fee for stormwater collection and management. Before we start the discussion, I want to remind everyone that we have 3 informational, opinion-seeking sessions coming up that are going to be hosted by the League of Women Voters. One is this Thursday evening, the 29th. It's in this building from 7 to 9 p.m. The league will be hosting it, our consultants will be presenting, our staff will be on hand to answer questions, and it's a slightly less formal setting in which you can learn more and, give your opinion, give your 2 cents about what you think should be changed or what you think is wrong with what has been proposed so far. So I really encourage you to come, participate, learn more. Oh, the other date is the September 12th. So the first date is this Thursday, the 29th. The second date is Thursday, September 12th. And that is, there'll be 2 sessions for anybody who can't make a night meeting. There's a 1 to 3 in the afternoon session. And then there's, again, a 7 to 9 session, again, in this building, hosted by, and it's the same thing all 3 times, so you don't have to come 3 times. But really, this is where your opinion gets heard and accounted for, and it's now or never. If you have an opinion, share it.
Elaine, are we going to hold up our ordinance until those meetings are conducted?
Yes. Yes.
Why are we going to do that? We're ready to enact this ordinance. I think we have the votes for it. We've had education since March of 2012 on this subject, maybe even longer. What are we going to do with the information that comes out of those 3 meetings, that will affect passage of this ordinance? The ordinance has been was introduced in July. It was discussed then. It was discussed at our August 12th meeting. I'm just not understanding why we have to wait. I don't even know when we would enact it if we have to wait till the evening of September 12th before we get the second League of Women Voters hearing passed. Bob, when are our meetings in September?
September 9th and the 23rd.
So we're going to wait now till September 23rd. I don't see the wisdom of that.
Well, I mean, the manager has recommended the fee not be, if passed, it would be generated in 2014, not this year. Before it was to get it done so that we could start generating fees, start getting things. We have an infusion of capital. We sent out a notice to all the residents, and we want to get as much input as we can, Jim. That's what we're doing. So we'll pass in a timely fashion if we have the votes, but we're going to give the public their opportunity to tell us what they think about it.
And I hate to beat this dead horse every time this comes up, but I know that the people who are directly affected by flooding are keenly aware of these issues and keenly aware of this whole process that has occurred over the last year, and their input has been wonderful. There are many other parts of the township that are not affected by flooding and are just becoming, they just received a mailing, and for many people that was their first introduction to this whole scheme, that mailing that went out 2 weeks ago. And those people are in my ward, and they are now returning from their vacations and Labor Day. They get this mailer. They need to get caught up. And I plan to have in my ward another meeting outside of the league meeting, just to have another opportunity, in mid-September for my constituents in that end of the township to understand what this is all about. But as I have said many times before, but I will repeat it again, if people don't understand this fee and don't feel that they had any part of it and it's just jammed down their throats without them understanding it, it's going to have a hard time surviving. The program will have a hard time surviving. I think I completely, fully support it, the program, and some fee that we come up with, but I can't defend it to people who've never heard of it. So.
Well, I could say something about the vacations in August that people are taking, but again, this is not something that's been hidden under the rug for the last year and a half. It's been discussed and debated. Secondly, the people that live on high ground in the southern part of the township that don't get flooded depend on Radnor Fire Company for help in an emergency. They depend on Radnor EMS for help in an emergency. They also depend on the Broomall Fire Company and the Bryn Mawr Fire Company. But our fire equipment has trouble. When we have these flash floods, our fire company equipment has difficulty getting out of the station house because South Wayne Avenue is under 2 feet, 18 inches of water. And those trucks may be going to places where people live that don't have any flooding problems on their individual parcels. So this is a problem that everybody will benefit from. The fee will be exacted from everybody on an equal basis. And again, I just don't see the wisdom of why we have to wait any longer.
All right, so moving on to a little bit more of the substance of tonight's discussion, we have two new things that just tonight, at our last meeting, we had a discussion about the merits of dividing up the spoils on a watershed basis, and we did some speculating about what that would look like. And we have received from our consultant just today a map that shows what the watershed, that gives the breakdown of the population by watershed and shows that. So that's one thing I think we can talk about tonight, or should talk about tonight. And I see our consultant is here, and perhaps if he doesn't mind being put on the spot, we could ask him to explain the map. The other thing we could talk about tonight a little bit is the fact that if we do put 1.32, is that the number? 1.32 million into this project at the get-go, what effect that might have on the fee. The reason the fee went up from our first discussions is because we did not want to do a bond. And then since we would need capital up front, it caused the fee to rise. So now that we have capital up front without doing a bond, the fee should go back down. So we can talk a little bit about that. But why don't we go ahead and, Brian, if you don't mind coming up, and if you put this map on the table, then Jim can show it on the screen so people can see what you're talking about.
It's probably going to be hard to read the legend there, but I want to zoom out just a little. I don't know if you can see it. The red line there indicates the municipal boundary for Radnor Township. And then you'll see two kind of
Get a little closer to the mic when you...
Oh, I'm sorry. You'll see two color-coded areas. It's hard to see it and explain it. So the two color-coded areas, there's the Delaware River Basin. We were asked to mainly focus on the major river or watersheds within the township, Delaware and Schuylkill, and look at the breakdown of the residential population between the two. So that's essentially what we did. The delineations are based on information that the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection put together, so that those are their delineations, truncated at the township watershed. And then the estimates for population are based on 2010 census data.
Okay. So, and the table is that 76% of our population lives on the Delaware River watershed, in the Delaware River watershed, and 24% of our population lives in the Schuylkill River. Right? I got that
Correct.
right?
Yep.
So 76-24. And Don, can you just reiterate, I mean, you were the proponent of this idea.
So I even have sample language. This would go in section 7, and my sense is we decide tonight if we want to do it, so that if we proceed with something like this, we have the professionals provide language to this effect. But the township shall determine the percentage of the total stormwater fee that is from each of the township's sheds. Funds collected via the stormwater fee and used for capital projects shall be distributed as per this percentage. Capital funds dedicated to the specific watersheds but not spent shall accumulate until used for projects in that watershed. So the idea is that people get sort of ownership of their watershed. I can even envision a scenario where, if this is an idea that people like, the Darby and the Cobbs are put into sub-watersheds, and then people have more input about what kind of stormwater interventions go into their particular watersheds. For now, if we're starting a 2-watershed delineation, is acceptable, but I would imagine if the goal is to get local input and support, you would want to even at some point in the future divide into further watersheds or sub-watersheds.
So, all right, wait, let me just make sure I understand this. So you'd have some amount that that everybody pays equally, like all of the operations and maintenance would be
Yes.
equal. So do you have a
Well, I
number
don't-
for that, or?
No, whatever it is we decide to allocate, like we're getting, this fee will produce some amount of money.
Say $100. Okay,
Yes.
$100 is.
And so imagine that a third of that goes to capital. Then that capital is divided
I
based
see.
roughly upon this. And so that if you want a stormwater intervention, that pot of money that accumulates for your watershed is how you get that intervention. So the water the interventions, the idea is to match the interventions to the areas and the people and get a little more local support for the interventions.
And what is capital? Is capital anything that's not operations and maintenance?
Fair enough at this point, yeah. I mean, I'm thinking capital is the intervention, so it's not the people, you know, it's if you're building a basin, if you're building some kind of swale, if you're building some kind of infiltration mechanism, if you're planting native grasses, if you're decide it's a green roof, whatever is the intervention should be as locally controlled as we can get them to be. And this is a mechanism to facilitate that local control.
So if a significant number of our population lives in one of the watersheds, but on an individual basis, properties there don't get flooded as frequently or as heavily as properties occupied by people in another watershed, the people that are living in that second watershed that get flooded, where their population is lower than the other watershed, will be shortchanged on the amount of money they'll have at their disposal to fix their problems.
Right. Now,
I don't,
but some people, the people who are paying for that wouldn't call that being shortchanged. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that's the reality that a lot of people aren't going to be happy about their money being moved to the other side of the township. And one way that we can get around your concern, Jim, or address your concern, is it doesn't have to be this 75-25 split. It can be a certain amount goes to capital anywhere, and then some portion is dedicated to the specific watershed. The idea is to, again, to facilitate local control of the interventions.
are you doing this in response to complaints you've had about some perceived inequity in the
No.
system we're
No,
contemplating?
I'll tell you what is the basis of it. The basis of it is, so in my capacity as an academic, I would say that this was the central element of what I studied. And one of the prime reasons why institutions fail is lack of local control, institutions for environmental control. So that's one of my reasons. A second reason is the widespread nature of, if these kinds of interventions are going to be effective, they have to be done on a watershed basis. There's no way you're going to convince people who live in the Cobbs Creek watershed but live in Tredyffrin that they should be part of any mechanism that we're doing if their resources are being diverted to the Schuylkill River shed. But if you build this on a watershed basis, or even lay the foundation for this happening in the future on a watershed basis, then you increase the likelihood that you can extend beyond just the boundaries of
But
Radnor.
Don, we don't use our tax resources in this fashion. We don't say that our tax resources are going to be spent more heavily in the Fifth Ward because they don't have enough parks than the First Ward has. We don't do that for police, we don't do it for fire protection, we don't do it for our library, we don't do it for our roads, our streets, our sewers, our highways. Why would we want to do it for this?
Well, one of the reasons would be that if you look at this is a problem that's 60 years in the making. Why have we never addressed it? We don't have this problem with police work. We don't have this problem with road work, but we have a huge problem with stormwater. And this is one of the reasons why we have the stormwater. Stormwater is a mismatch. And this localized control is one of the ways that you address the mismatch. So the short answer to your concern is that stormwater is very different than those other concerns that you identified, as indicated by the fact that we're in this dilemma that we're in now.
Can I interject a thought, though? I support the concept of watershed basis for dividing the funding Sorry? Just the capital funding.
Even just a portion of the capital,
Yeah.
so to further.
But I think I'd like to argue that the watershed basis works best when it's regionalized. Just for some of the reasons why Don mentioned. We have a large amount of inflow into the township from neighboring communities that are not part of our system. And it may lead to a disproportional flooding condition in those areas. Yet our system will potentially reduce their funding. But to say it more simply, if we had a regional system in the state or in the county or between the counties, then a watershed basis would work much better than it does on a local level. So I think while I would like to have a watershed basis for allocating the capital expenditures, I think I support Commissioner Higgins' point. It's looking, I look at the numbers, it reminds me of the 80-20 rule. What worries me is that 80% of the flooding is happening to 20% of the people. And if we go to a watershed basis, there's a good chance the 80% of the people that are getting flooded may not get more than 20% of the funding. So we have to be careful not to let this mechanism trump the reality of what's happening right here in our boundaries of Radnor Township. Now, if we get into a discussion with other municipalities or even with the county, and they want to adopt some form of regional stormwater authority, then I would completely expect that to be on a watershed basis because it makes more sense. Again, the flooding we're experiencing in Wayne has a lot to do with the neighboring communities as much as it does with Wayne.
If I don't have any objections from my colleagues, I'd like to see if there's anyone in the audience that would like to participate in this discussion.
May I ask a question though
Well, I
before we
just-
go forward? Bob, Steve sent out this note about the program cost being 1.56 million. Is the intent to have that program cost funded by the fee in 2014?
That's correct.
So you'll pull that expense out of the general fund expense and put it into the stormwater management fund?
Correct.
So are you going to take $1.56 million off of the real estate tax revenue since it's supposed to be funded by the fee?
You're talking about the operational ones, correct? Or are you talking about capital?
I'm talking about this thing that says total program cost $1.56 million.
For what, for 1 year?
I want to understand where that expense shows up in next year's budget.
Commissioner Higgins, I'm sorry, are you talking about the current services?
Just use that as a number.
And I believe when we laid out the whole program, the idea was that a certain amount of what we currently do would stay within the general fund, and what was laid out under the stormwater funding mechanism would be a whole separate entity. So that money that
So we went up with a hybrid?
That's what we had laid out, that originally, a certain amount of the work we do would still be part of the general fund, and a large portion of that number is our street sweeping and leaf collection programs, as well as cleaning inlet tops and all that. But probably the biggest single portion of that is leaf collection and street sweeping, which are all integral to stormwater, but that's where that falls.
But the expenses that are in here that you pull out and put into the stormwater fund, depending upon the size of them, there ought to be a commensurate reduction in the revenue line for the taxes, because now it's getting funded by the fee. Am I clear in my explanation?
You have to remember, a lot of what we're laying out in the stormwater funding mechanism, we're not doing right now. So there's not a one-for-one correlation. We aren't doing as much in the MS4 that we should be doing. We're not doing as much in the repair, maintenance, and/or replacement, and we're certainly not doing as much as we would be in capital. So if you look at them as two separate items,
there's not a direct reduction because we really aren't doing them. This is on top of what that 1.56 million is of street sweeping and leaf
All right,
collection.
I'm not going to beat a dead horse here all night. When you lay out the budget, I want to see the movement, because I don't want to see some stealth tax increase by having the expenses moved over to a different fund and the revenues that were funding those expenses still there in the general fund. Do you understand my point, Bill?
Yes, I
Thank-
do understand. Not sure that would have ever been anyone's intention, because I think we've been pretty transparent
Yeah, I
about how we
understand.
disclose
But I want to
this.
see it laid out so it's apparent to everybody who doesn't sit here and look at this stuff to the level of detail that some of us do.
Sure.
Okay. Do we have any comment on?
I just wanted to add something. I support the watershed concept as Don described. I think it's important to understand a large portion of what's involved with stormwater management is still township-wide, maintenance of the existing infrastructure and such. So what we're talking about here is these extra stormwater programs that were pretty much talked about as part of the Stormwater Advisory Committee.
Yeah, I was just looking through this 10-year program plan, and I was trying to do the math myself about like what percentage is capital over the next 10-year, what percentage. It looks to me like it's like 60-40-ish. Is that about right? 60% capital, 40 everything else? Does that seem right?
In that general area, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the numbers sort of look like. So 60% of this is kind of site-specific capital projects. 40%, maybe 50%, somewhere around that, is everybody.
I'd
It
also
affects
point
everyone.
out that when you look at the map, there are areas of heavy flooding in both of these watersheds.
Right, that's the
But the difference is that South Wayne floods because 174 acres of Radnor Township come down to South Wayne, Midland Avenue. Poplar Avenue floods because 600 acres of Tredyffrin, and, you know, it's not Radnor Township water.
And we need to work with
They have 600
Tredyffrin.
acres coming down there, so their problem is going to be a lot greater than the 174 acres that are coming down to Midland Avenue. And so that's why you can't do this disproportionate thing, because, you know, we have to deal with that problem in Wayne. It's only, you know, 20% of the watershed in Radnor, but there's 600 acres coming down there
Yeah,
from somewhere else.
I do want to make a point that some would argue that this watershed delineation would actually help the dilemma that you've identified. Essentially, by ensuring that, you know, 25% of the population, I mean, you look at the light blue area, that 25% of the population is contributing to interventions in that particular area. So it's a double-edged sword, and it's not as negative as I believe you've portrayed it and Jim has portrayed it, that there's a way of, that in some ways this would be beneficial to the dilemma that the mismatch that you're concerned about.
I'm missing it, so.
Well, maybe
All
the
right.
question, if I may ask too, is when you talk about local control, what do you mean by local control? Who determines local control?
I'm talking about citizens groups having input about what goes into the interventions that are in their neighborhood.
Which
So-
they're going to have
Yes.
either way.
So
Right. All right, let's hear from our residents, and on this watershed issue or on any issue that is involved in this program.
Hello. Hello, my name's Doug Blasey. I live in Bill Springler's district on Upland Way. I guess I have several things to say in response to what I've heard. One, I received the first notice I knew of this ordinance last Tuesday night, and when I opened my mail, I guess I could have run down here at 9 or 9:30, and you might have been here, but I didn't think to do that. So that was the first, frankly, Commissioner Higgins, that I was aware of this ordinance being considered. And this is not a convenient week for me, but I'm here, and I see the League of Women Voters. I mean, this is the end of summer for a lot of people. They're away, and I don't think they have easy access to comment, and I don't think we realized an ordinance of this magnitude was on the table. I'm much more familiar with PAG 13, the MS4 program, which does not sound like it's your focus, but I'll mention it only quickly because I really want to get to the discussion between taxes and fees, and I think there's a profound difference, and I think you're mixing them up as I've heard this discussion. The MS4 program, essentially you applied for a permit that you may or may not have yet gotten, and when issued, it'll be good for 5 years. So whatever you were committed or committing our township to do for state purposes, you submitted several months ago. I think it was, as I recall, last March or April, our applications were due, and we haven't heard boo from the state now for several months. But once we do, well, you'll have a 5-year permit. So at least from a state regulatory perspective, the heat is off. Now, that does not mean we shouldn't use those 5 years to make good judgments and good plans. And in fact, I support a fee concept in many situations, so I'm not here to say fees are bad. But my understanding is that
Excuse me, Doug, what does the MS4 have to do with us trying to control flooding of private properties?
Well, it may not have to do, that's what I'm saying. I think there's a double issue here. Jim, many of the MS4 issues involve TMDL limited streams.
Involve what?
What are called total maximum daily load. Water quality standards in streams are driving much of the state's stormwater program. There's a separate program for flooding.
We've been discussing this for 19 months, and we haven't had one issue related to the MM4 and the total, so I don't know why you're...
Well, I'm just saying...
Jim, why don't we just let him have his discussion, not have a debate now? We'll just
All I'm saying, to the extent that your stormwater, which is, the MS4 program is the municipal separate storm sewer program. It is the state regulatory program for storm sewers, quite independent of the Act 167, Floodplain Management and Stormwater Planning Acts, which I think should make better use of and think about. So I'm saying from the purpose of a state regulatory program, you made an application, you presumably will get an approval or have it, and it'll be good for 5 years. So the commitment the township made to the state presumably were relatively minor and will get approved, and you'll have 5 years to think about it. Now, to the extent you're dealing with local flooding, you've got authorities under municipal laws to deal with that. But the difference between general taxation revenues and a fee revenue is that it's a fee for service. So for example, we pay our, used to be Philly Suburban, it's now Aqua PA. We pay a water bill based on the water we consume, and our sewer bill is calculated based on the water we consume. That's a fee for a service. And if we were to have a trash fee, which I see is another issue, let's say I put out 50 pounds a week and every 50 pounds is so many dollars, and if I put out 150, I'm going to get charged more. It's a fee for service. But you don't start talking about, oh, we will have a uniform $100 fee and then we'll put it where we want. That's a tax. So if you want to do these things with general revenues, you can do them anytime you feel like it. But as Elaine and you were saying, if you want some fairness, in your sense of the word fairness, and have it applied to the generation and the off-site transport of stormwater, then that needs to be, and have the fee related to the remedial project that is implemented with it. You've got to tie it, and I think this is where Don's point is very well taken. You can't charge me a fee to fix a problem that's totally unrelated to the fee you're charging me. You can tax me.
Who's saying we're doing that?
Pardon?
How are we doing that? How are we spending money on a problem that's totally unrelated to?
I assume through general revenues and general taxation.
Well, I see where you're going, and I understand your logic. However, the whole setup of the program and the reason your fee that you would pay is tied to how much impervious coverage you have on your property is because we extrapolate from that. If you have X amount of impervious coverage, you have the consequent runoff. And that runoff has to be treated, it has to be controlled, and if it's causing flooding, we have to have capital projects that treat it, ameliorate the situation. So I understand your point completely, and I think you're right. And the way that we tie our fee to what the service your house is getting is by tying it to the impervious coverage that you have and the runoff that, in general, that would create.
You've said two different things there. The amount of impervious coverage may not relate at all to runoff. There may be dry wells on a property. You may have, 25% coverage, impervious coverage. You may be retaining all of that on some properties. On other properties, it may be going directly to the street. So again, when you've got a fee structure, you've got to look at ways that people can offset it because you're charging them for a service. Part of it. Now, one of the reasons people look to fees is because embedded developments have existing rights for the plan that was approved. So take a large shopping center or an office park. When this township or the board approved the development, it approved the stormwater plans for it. And you can't go backwards and undo that land development approval. Now, you can charge them general taxes like you can charge everyone else and then apply it to fix the problem. Or you could set up a fee structure that says, we now have a stormwater fee related to the water you're discharging. We're going to use that to moderate or ameliorate the problem. That's a fee, and your solicitor knows far better than I because you're you're a first-class township, but you're a home rule charter. I'm not sure whether under your home rule you can universally, you may be able to adopt fees, but that's not clear to me that first-class townships and the others have fee authority for stormwater yet. Maybe the home rule charter is broad enough, but that's an issue. And I just think there are different categories of properties that have to be thought about, Commissioner, in terms of who's contributing what and where it's going before we do it to have a valid system. And as I say, I'm not opposed to it, but it seems to me we're rushing very fast on a general fee system. And that would be my comment. And I'll go to the League of Women Voters and listen more carefully.
I want to just comment, I mean, we have had those thoughts before as well about, the perfect system would measure the net runoff of your property, would take into account if you have native grasses planted and if you have a cistern and whatnot.
You have a rain garden. You can have any number of things.
But
right?
a system like that to calculate the net runoff of every single property in this township we'd be paying 60% administrative, 40% capital and O&M.
And that's sometimes a reason to do it out of general revenues. I'm saying that's for you to consider. I'm just saying that if you think about your water bill and your sewer bill, if you thought about a garbage bill, the fee for service, phone service, is supposedly you are paying for the service you received, and your fee is commensurate with that. Now, I'm sure you've got some wiggle room. Your solicitor undoubtedly will tell you how much wiggle room you've got in this arena, but I don't think you can convert a simple fee into essentially a taxation program and move it all around unrelated to the reason you're taking it from that property.
If we take the fee and use it to build culverts, to expand our stream beds, to protect property like Ken Taylor has on Willow Avenue and the others, isn't that directly related to why we're collecting the fee? That's what our plan is.
Doug, can I ask a follow-up, like a piggyback on that? If the interventions were done on the watershed basis, then it would satisfy the prime concern that you've identified, which is you need to see the link between the issue and the solution, and if money can be moved around anywhere, you don't have that link.
Essentially, and remember, I said in the beginning, I'm not opposed to this. In fact, for a number of my clients, we've raised it as something to be considered, very seriously considered. But again, think of an authority. If you have a sewer authority, it's not taxing you, it's charging you sewer rent. And the sewer rent is related to the service you receive. So if you're an industrial consumer and you have higher BOD demand or more waste, you pay more. It's related to the service. And all I'm saying, I think, is a legal question for the group to consider is whether we've got fee authority from the Commonwealth at this point. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I testified before the legislature saying we should have it. Maybe under the Home Rule Charter, you've got it.
Well, we have precedent in Allegheny County. Mount Lebanon Township has
Well,
had this
you've
fee
got
for-
a couple.
for 2 years. So
Well, whether they've gotten away with it or not, or whether it's been adjudicated is another matter. All's I'm saying that, so even if you pass the legal hurdle, you still have the relationship between the service and the fee. And it's not clear to me we've thoroughly thought that through. And I'll go and listen. Thank you.
Hi, Ken Taylor from Willow Avenue. I'm looking forward to the League of Women Voters educational sessions, because if for no other reason, I think they could be used if there's not discussion of just the ordinance, but also some of the engineering behind the thrust of this ordinance. It's a bit disingenuous, and perhaps it comes out of just not considering because you're not someone who has a wet basement every time it rains, and I understand that. But even the concept that that there are a great number of people in this township that don't generate stormwater is a misconception. I hope that's part of the educational program that the League of Women Voters puts on. Whether you have a driveway that is canted toward the street, or your sidewalks are canted toward the street, and maybe you're got a wonderful installation and you're controlling all the other stormwater on your premises, I would put forth the idea that almost no one produces no stormwater, and that has to go somewhere. It goes into our streets, it goes into our stream beds, and I'm just pleased as punch to see this board finally not putting this on the back burner as so many prior boards have done, and I'm really looking forward for this ordinance to move forward. As to the fee structure, I don't think, at least perhaps if the board goes the route of the seed money for the BPT settlement, perhaps that can be utilized to speed the process of mapping the residential property, so we are able to move from the unit fee to the actual impervious fee on a quicker fashion. That should eliminate some of the citizens concerned about about the equity of the unit fee. But I would suggest that the $56 and change per unit for 7,000 square feet, I've checked with a couple of landscapers, and that's about what they charge to cut that amount of grass once. It's a little disingenuous to think that I'm going to discharge my total civic responsibility for my runoff and maybe throwing a little something in the pot to take care of others in the township. And the point was well taken that that's not how we decide which roads to retop. That's not how we decide to do almost anything else in the way of allocating resources. And I don't think we should change that format just for this. Regarding the watershed escrow concept, I agree with Commissioner Fisher that when this is regionalized per watershed, this is definitely where we're moving with this. And this, we may see a day when this ordinance is terminated because every household has been compelled through one of these watershed authorities to join and pay. If that's what happens, that's what happens. And we're able to disband this, and local municipalities are no longer expected to tote the barge as far as this is concerned, because it's done on a regional basis. But we're not there yet. And for us to do that on a micro basis in this township, and to perhaps create the kind of inequities that would be one watershed having a large fund overbalance, or being spent on projects that don't have a great bang for the buck, and ignoring the kind of input that we've gotten from Chagrin Valley, from AMEC, and from even Pannoni on a list of prioritized bang for the buck projects that have been put off for so many years. I would suggest that to take the watershed approach, even if it's only a portion of the capital budget, would be to take out of this board's hands the ability to take the intelligent input from Chagrin as far as prioritizing which projects should come first. And if that's not in my watershed, or it's not on the Gulf Creek, then so be it. Because I trust them to say that we need to, that we have a big problem over here. The engineering says we have a problem over here. And the fact that that water flows into a different watershed is not going to change how this board is going to prioritize its allocation of these capital resources. I don't want to see the day when this board, until the regionalization of these watersheds comes, and that's going to take it completely off of your table. But you're not going to have anything to do with it. It's not even going to be perhaps something that you oversee like you do your sewer authority or your appointments to the sewer authority. But until that day comes, I think this board has a responsibility, especially with all these backlog projects, until everything is up and running and I stop coming here and complaining to you, and you have projects that would just increase the quality of life, but are not life-threatening or threatening our services like our firehouse. That when those projects are complete, perhaps we can revisit that, but not at this time. I really appreciate this moving on. I'm sorry to see yet another hurricane season go by, but I know the process is long and laborious. We've come this far. I'm certainly willing to let the educational sessions play themselves out. So that if nothing else, these folks understand what part they play in creating the problem and what part they're going to play in solving it. Thank you.
Madam President, while the gentleman's walking to the podium, just as FYI, Senate Bill 351 was signed into law by the governor on July 9th, authorizing municipal authorities to create a stormwater utility.
Stormwater utilities.
So.
Can I just say that's authorities, not the township?
To create authorities.
That's an issue, I think, because my testimony and that of our coalition before the board was to consider giving that to second-class townships, boroughs, and first-class townships. Because in fact, it's the townships that make the land development decision, own the roads, own the storm sewer systems, not the authorities. The authorities happen to tend to be sanitary authorities, or in some case, water utility authorities, but not stormwater. Now, if you wanted to pass it over to them, you could. They would have a fee. They have a fee, not a tax. So when you said, Jim, Commissioner, that we handle roads, we handle many other things collectively, that's absolutely right, by taxation through the general budget. So, and there, it's your judgment what's fair and how it should be applied. I'm only saying there's a difference between the general budget use of funds and a fee sense of use of funds, and that needs to be carefully thought through, and you can't just kind of, oh, well, we'll call it a fee, we'll grab it, and we'll kind of apply it like we apply tax monies. That's different.
Madam President, if I may just ask the gentleman, he's well-versed, if I may. How do you address the issues of the colleges and universities who do not pay real estate taxes but contribute a great amount of stormwater that you continue to support that taxpayers should continue to subsidize their operations?
That's a tricky one, and that's kind of why I was saying I am not opposed to a fee. I just want to know where the legal authority for it is. Now, if under your home rule charter, you can act in a sense like a municipal authority can and have a fee structure then that is charged for a service rendered, I think you could do it. And then you could apply that to commercial developments, apartment buildings. You can apply it to small lots, to the downtown. You can apply it within our boundaries. But the basic logic of any fee is it is a fee for a service received by that fee payer, which is how it differs from general tax.
We got it. It's a good point. Thank you.
Good evening.
Hello.
My name's Pat Nolan. I live on West Avenue. And it turns out that both of my sons who live in Wayne are impacted by processes that are on this schedule here tonight. I'm particularly interested, however, in my son who owns a home on that famous boulevard called Plant Avenue. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but it gets severe flooding now. I never saw cars on the street absolutely flood up to the seat level, which occurred over in this place. Now, the reason I have a number of questions with respect to my one son who owns the corner property on Plant. And when he bought that home, about 12 years ago. About a year later, Hurricane Floyd, some of you might be familiar with that term, It's the first time I ever saw a storm send up 5-foot geysers from manhole covers. It was a monster storm around here, and it never put a foot of water or even an inch of water into my son's basement. Now my son gets regularly 1 to 3 feet of water at least once or twice a year. Now, one of the things that I am interested in knowing is, one, apart from watershed, which I don't understand at all, I only understand this problem in terms of a personal, situation with it. And I'd like to know whether, number one, the management, and I don't need this answered right now, but whether the water management is going to be a general process which is going to try to alleviate, the water crisis all over the township, or whether it will mix general with targeted areas such as Plant Avenue for correction. Secondly, this leads to my second question now. The reason that the flooding changed with my son's property on Plant was because apparently, now I'm giving you this as hearsay because I never walked onto the campus to find out, but Eastern went through some major building projects over there in the last few years. And according to my son's testimony to me, what he has found out through all of his friends who live on the street that suffered the same problem is that this flooding started after the building that went on and proceeded on Eastern.
So,
my
Mr.
second
Knoll,
question-
that wouldn't have been the cause. Eastern construction and paving would create problems east of the college, south of the college, but your son lives west and north of the college. He's getting flooded for other reasons.
Okay. All right. Well, then that takes care of that question. What I'd like to ask is then, would Plant Avenue be likely to profit from the storm management program as you envision it? The reason I mention this now is that only the last big flood, probably 10 months ago, a young woman invested $80,000 to build up her home there. She had a brand new Audi. The house went and the Audi went. And so as personal victims of this, is your storm management plan going to encompass, targeted areas that suffer as badly as Plant Avenue?
Well,
All right.
let me just say that when we pass this fee, we're not simultaneously passing an exact list of 50 projects that are going to happen right then.
Right.
It's going to be an ongoing process that's part of our capital process every year. So every year, we'll be allocating funds for certain projects. So even if Plant Avenue was #1 priority in the documents that were used last year, that may or may not occur when it actually comes time to paying. So having said that, the spending program will evolve as we go along. There is a capital projects backlog prioritization chart that was part of the SAC's work over the last year, and it has all kinds of, in addition to regular the management and operations of all of our facilities and culverts and whatnot, it has specific projects listed. You can get online and look at it, but it has North Wayne Park, it has Ivan Avenue, Midland Avenue, Radnor Middle School, West Wayne Preserve, South Devon, Forest Road. So projects surrounding, and you can go on and look at all of those priority projects that are backlogged in that some engineer in the last 10 years has told us that these things need to be done and we ignored them. So that's out there for you to look at. I don't know off the top of my head if any of these projects on this list will have a direct effect on plant. So I don't know the geography up there that well.
Forest Road may.
The Forest Road, and
May.
that's in the top priority, critical priority category. So if that project went forward the first year of our program, then it's possible that, hopeful, that it would provide some relief for the Plant Road. But again, I want to emphasize that every year when we decide our capital budget, so every October and November, we authorize what's going to be spent in the next year. And that's up to the 7 commissioners.
Right.
So we have this plan of spending that's been put together by our citizen group that worked and our professionals that worked on this. This is sort of our map going forward, but it will change with every
Okay.
year. As things percolate up to the top as becoming a priority, they might displace some of these things.
This is my last question, and it's very quick, and it's almost personal, really. But whatever the fee happens to be, which I regard as rather modest, actually, at least in relationship to my property, would my son come to expect that he would be subject to, let's say, a fee for the pleasure of having his basement flooded anywhere from 1 to 3 feet when the really bad storms occur? And which means I am asking you, are you going to have some kind of an exception to this in terms of the people who suffer the most from the flooding? And oftentimes suffer not because of anything that they brought on, but because the development within the township brought this upon Plant Avenue and my son. So will you have exceptions to this particular
That
issue?
has not been put forth.
I didn't think so.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Hello.
Hi, yes, my name is Randy Roberts. I live at 663 Conestoga Road. My understanding is that Conestoga Road is a state road. I've met with Mr. Norsini, and I believe Mr. Norsini and the township manager met with my neighbor. Last year, my pool was filled with mud because the state dumps water on this outlet through their backyard, or their really front yard, the way it sits on the Conestoga Road. And if they don't maintain this ditch, which apparently when they said they bought the house wasn't there, but now it's a major ditch, and during Sandy, a 100-foot tree fell into my front yard. One also went into the street and almost got a road crew cleaning. So I am fully in favor of the fee, but some of us will never be impacted by it, because my understanding is if it's a state road, you don't clean the outlets, correct? Or do you?
Well, I think your problem goes a little deeper than just cleaning the inlet tops on Conestoga Road. I think that's
I think even if they were cleaned, I'd be in worse shape.
I think that's a general term.
Right.
You sit at the bottom of a hill, or near the bottom of a hill on Conestoga Road.
Right.
So all the water from up at the crest comes down towards your property. Some of it, if the inlets were cleaned by PennDOT, would be conveyed through the pipes to your neighbor's front yard. And
well, there are no pipes.
Well, right at where that inlet is,
It
which
just drops.
it takes it back to your neighbor's. Otherwise, it would convey, as it normally does, just comes running down the side of the street and would go in. So whether, in my mind, that whether the inlet is cleaned by PennDOT or not, that water is coming to your property.
Right. So, I mean, legally.
But this program
Right.
isn't directed towards state roads or local roads.
Right.
It's towards
Township.
different properties.
Right.
So as the program goes on and perhaps different projects take place, if runoff is reduced off of certain properties, there may be a reduction of stormwater on state roads, just as there may be on township roads. Now, a lot of what we spoke about with the gentleman that was just up these were all township roads. This is as Commissioner Schaefer noted, there's a targeted area there in Forest and other spots. We're not looking at it as a state and local road issue, but there is another entity that bears responsibility for what happens on Conestoga Road from a conveyance standpoint.
Right, so that some of us are impacted by the state, and, by my understanding, Mr. Bush of the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation told me their only goal in life is to divert water off the road. That's it. End of story. So I've been directed to go to my neighbor. So I got a lawyer, and legally he can't divert water onto my property. But because I don't want to go through a lengthy battle, I paid $2,000 to solve his problem to keep water out of my pool, so it's at least past my pool. So I'm already $2,000 in the hock just living here. So, I mean, if I got to pay another $150, well, whatever it's going to be, $160, I guess I don't mind paying it, but at some point, I had to have a tree taken down at $1,200 so it wouldn't go through my living room, because that's part of that. We both, $2,000 apiece to correct this problem that we're being damaged by the state. So I just felt, there's a lot of big complex issues here, but obviously we have water issues and we all got to survive it. So in some respects, I am in favor of the fee, but I'm also out a lot of money already. So anyway, I just felt like I needed to say something. That I only got the message on Tuesday, but I've lived with this for 2.5 years, and I've been very patient. I think I have. I mean, I've been trying to help my neighbor solve a problem. So there we go. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your comments.
I think this really ties into a bigger issue. Your house and pool are above the creek, right?
Oh, yeah, I'm above the creek.
So all the normal runoff from your house, from your driveway, from the deck around your pool, goes into that creek and does affect somebody downhill, downstream from you. So I know you have issues with PennDOT, but this really just shows the cycle that goes on. Rainwater hits your driveway, your downspouts, your pool deck, goes into that stream, and the term we use in all these things, somebody's downhill of somebody all the time, or you're uphill. So in essence, what you could pay might help those folks downstream from your property.
Right, and also, but the water ends up in my backyard. Regardless, I'm getting the water, whether it's in front of my pool or behind my pool.
Okay. Is there anybody else that would like to participate?
Hi, my name is James Guthline. I live on 105 Banbury Way. That's at the corner of Francis and Banbury behind the Wawa. During storms, it floods pretty significantly. I have seen the manhole covers fly off like the gentleman had. I had the luxury of yanking one back on myself. That was fun, and pushing several cars out of the floods. My wife and I have lived there for about 4 years now, and it's not getting any better. A couple of questions I do have about the fee regarding that. Will it expire at the end of all projects?
Well, in theory, when we solve all the world's problems with stormwater, yes. But in reality, that is so far in the future, it's not really worth speculating about. I mean, the problem is the magnitude of this problem and the amount of impervious coverage that we would have to get rid of or neutralize is decades of projects.
So based upon the priority of what you have set up is 105 Banbury Way on that corner, on that slated area?
I don't know the geography of that area so well.
Mr. Guthline's property is affected by a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
State Route 30, we have a lot of runoff from there. West Avenue, our streets, state streets. Banbury and Francis is a hot spot, a long time area that has flooded, and it would be on the list to review to see what we can do. We know there's a stormwater system there. It was installed a decade or two ago. It is undersized. There's no doubt about that, hence the manholes that come up. How quickly that could be done, knowing that we have a contribution from state roads, getting back to the other gentleman's, that we have some water from there, but that would be a targeted area at one point in the capital portion of the projects.
The other question I have regarding the fees, do you understand how much you're actually going to generate and how long it's going to take before you have enough money to actually begin work?
Yes, that has been computed, and that's the way the whole system was structured, was that the schedule of the projects that were kind of garnered together, the fees that they came up with or suggesting would cover the rate at which we could complete those projects. So yes, it's not like we have to wait until we get enough money and then start.
Great. I also want to say I appreciate the patience in having these extra meetings. As many people noted, the first time I really knew something about this was going out outside from hearing from Mr. Higgins, who I've written to before, and Mr. Orsini, who I've spoken with. More detailed, I appreciate you guys having those meetings in the coming weeks.
You're welcome. Thank you. I just want to say one thing that this brought up, and that is in the spending program and areas that we need to treat. You know, when we hired Chagrin years ago, they went out and sent surveys around the community, and they went out and tried to get a real pulse on where the issues were and where the most significant flooding problems were. And we all tried to solicit from our constituents, if there were problems, please let us know so we could put them in the hopper. And a lot of the projects that are in our backlog come from that process. And you know, they may not have gotten every problem out there. There may be some significant problems that didn't get included. Hence, our program is going to be fluid and changing as we move forward. And meetings like this, and meetings as we develop our spending program, having people come forward and making sure that we're aware of a particular area and advocating for some help in that area, that's part of the spending program, is having us aware of it, having our staff aware of it, and that way when we do next year's capital budget, you know, we can decide whether that particular area needs some spending. So it helps us all reiterate in our heads that this is a moving target, and problem areas are going to pop up that we haven't identified, in addition to the ones that we already have the backlog for.
Well, I think Mr. Guthline has pointed out that we have an overlooked project right at the Wawa on Banbury and Francis Avenue, and it's been there for probably when you were back in grade school, that flooding problem. And Mr. Nolan's son we have the same thing on Plant Avenue. So it's obvious that, as Elaine says, it's massive. This is a little bit off point, but Bob, are we going to have a full-time staff professional to do stormwater in the near future?
A full-time person to administer the stormwater?
Well, a full-time person to do everything that Steve Norsini is doing now, or some of what he's doing now, in stormwater analysis, working with the Chagrin Valley, working with AMEC. Yeah, another set of hands to help on this problem.
Well, I think with Steve and his staff and with our engineers, that's what their role is, so.
But we also, in the program, in our draft program from SAC is I guess we're calling them a program administrator and oversight person, employee, new.
Right.
You know,
Actually,
I don't know if that's a new employee or if someone in our staff.
It was in our, as opposed to hiring new staff, the physical work, you know, whether it be installing pipes, obviously that would be bid out and would be done by contractors. But the majority of that work would be done by our consultants. And the thought was, by using the consultants on a much more greater frequency than we do now, it does two things. There's not the hire of an employee, and as you put out that fund over the years, on certain years when less funding is available, you just reduce the use of the consultant. And on years when more funding is available, or the way it's scheduled that way, we can do that. But the intent would be to lean heavily on either Chagrin or Gannett Fleming or one of our consultants to work on these programs on a very close basis.
But when a commissioner has a need for an answer or a solution or an analysis, we can't go to Chagrin. We have to go to you, and you're too busy.
Well, you can come to me, or let's say it was Gannett Fleming, because they're our township engineer, and they have feet on the ground here in Radnor, and Tredyffrin, both places. Because they have feet on the ground in Radnor, I would see that a person from Gannett would be working very closely, and you would email me and that person and get your response.
Okay, let's keep going with resident input.
I think Commissioner Fisher was so worried about my comments, he had to turn the air conditioning on or
getting
something.
hot.
I don't know. Hi, I'm Maya Vemrossam. I am a resident of Radnor Township at 716 South Roberts Road, but I'm also speaking here tonight in my capacity as the Delaware Riverkeeper. And I would just like to highlight that the Schuylkill is a tributary to the Delaware and part of the Delaware River watershed. So, in case anybody misunderstood the map. I would agree that the discussion of the concept of stormwater has been going on for a while, but I would absolutely wholeheartedly disagree that the discussion of this ordinance has been going on for very long. The ordinance language only came out in July. So that's all the time that the residents or anybody, or even you, have had the opportunity to really consider what is actually being proposed, not conceptually, actually being proposed by the ordinance language. And so that's why I'm here to speak tonight. I think there are a lot of problems with the ordinance language as it's proposed, and I don't think that it will accomplish the goals of the commissioners, the township, or the residents as it's written. So it's not that I'm opposed to, support, or think otherwise about the fee. But I am opposed to this ordinance because I don't think that it'll achieve the goals that it portrays that it will achieve. First of all, I have comments. I didn't have time to print enough copies for everybody. I'm going to give one to Madam President and to Steve Norsini and to Bob Ziankowski, and then you all can get copies later. I'm just going to highlight for you a few key areas that are in these comments, but they're much more comprehensive, and I hope that you'll take the opportunity to read them. But just to speak to Commissioner Higgins' point, the MS4 program, which is directed towards the water quality impacts of stormwater, is absolutely part of this ordinance, and it's actually discussed in your fourth whereas clause. The reference to the US EPA program, that's the MS4 program. And I did confirm with AMEC that that is partly what they had in mind when they wrote that whereas provision. So you may not have understood that. They may not have used the MS4 language, but it's in here. I would also, just for the record, the list of capital improvements that's been discussed as coming before the Stormwater Advisory Committee. That list was not discussed, reviewed, crafted, created, or signed off on by the Stormwater Advisory Committee. And I think that Mr. Norsini and the folks at AMEC will confirm that I urge them to make absolutely clear to you and to the public that that was the case. That list was put together by township staff to give the members of the advisory committee a sense of the quantity of money that we were talking about as being needed in the near term and the long term. There was in no way, shape, or form discussion about whether or not they were good projects, bad projects, priority projects, or anything. And in fact, there are a number of projects on there that, had they been discussed, I would have absolutely opposed. So that's why I wanted to make sure that that was clear for the record. So again, I don't oppose the fee concept. I think it's a fine idea. I don't really have an opinion. I'm happy to pay it or not to pay it. But this ordinance doesn't get you what you think you're getting the way it's written. So I think that amendments do need to happen before you go to vote. And just to highlight some areas. First off, one of the primary guidance documents from the state of Pennsylvania, the Stormwater Best Management Practices Manual, that provides guidance on how communities should be treating stormwater, capturing it, infiltrating it, treating it, in order to meet their goals of protecting folks from the damages of stormwater, but also to meet legal obligations. That document is nowhere referenced in the ordinance, and I think as a result, you miss the opportunity to get that guidance from the state on how you should be investing the fees that you are collecting and how you should be working with your credits program. So I think that that's an oversight. In the statement, in both the whereas clauses and the statements of findings. Number of problems with the statement of findings, but one of the one that I want to highlight in my comment is in paragraph D. Paragraph D, right, the statement of findings and the whereas clauses, they sort of set the stage for what you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to go about accomplishing it. Paragraph D talks about, quote, controlling flooding, erosion, and pollution. It doesn't talk about avoidance and minimization. And that's really what we're focused on here when we're talking about dealing with stormwater. We're not just talking about controlling it. We're not just talking about, the idea shouldn't just be to collect it and move it around the township, which is what this ordinance does. The idea should be, how are we going to solve the problems and the damages and the impacts of stormwater? And you do that by avoiding stormwater runoff, by minimizing stormwater runoff. And that's how you address the whole array of harms that result. So I think that paragraph D needs to be modified or edited. Rather than have controlling, you should have the language avoid and minimize. I do think that the way the user fee is proposed, that it is inequitable between the single-family residential properties, how it handles single-family residential properties, and the commercial, private, recreational, institutional, and industrial properties. In the case of single-family residential properties, larger lots are subject to a larger fee because presumably they have a greater volume of runoff for a variety of reasons, including the level of impervious surface and how they manage their property, which would include lawnscapes. In the case of commercial, private, recreational, institutional, and industrial properties, they are not similarly being billed for their larger lots. They are only being billed for the specific impervious cover, which specifically exempts lawnscapes from the definition. And that's a huge, huge mistake. Large-scale lawnscapes have been scientifically demonstrated to be a very significant source of runoff. The level of compaction that you have in lawnscapes make lawnscapes about as hard as pavement, which means the volume of runoff that is coming from lawnscapes is about as much as you get from pavement. Some of these large institutional properties, golf courses, have massive lawnscapes with significant compacted soils and very significant sources of runoff as a result. And they do not get charged more to cover for that additional runoff the way this ordinance is crafted. There are a number of ways that you can address that issue. You can modify the definition of impervious area to include lawns and lawnscapes or compacted soils. You can subject non-single family residential parcels, all those places I mentioned, the institutional, et cetera, to a fee scale that incorporates their lot size. There are a number of ways to do that. You can deal with the large-scale lawnscape issue through the credits program. But you've got to deal with it somehow. You shouldn't just be ignoring it and allowing these big institutions with big properties and significantly more runoff as a result to get away with it and have it not covered by the fee schedule. I mean, talk about equity. There's no equity there between the residential property owner and the non-residential property owner under this fee structure. I provide for you in my comment some examples of how other communities deal with this issue. When they deal with it in the definition of imperviousness. They deal with it by using different runoff coefficients that apply to those institutional, those large properties. They deal with it by having a larger fee for larger size lots for non-residential parcels, using the equivalent residential unit process, which basically you identify what's an equivalent residential unit size, a plot of land, and then whether you're residential or non-residential, right, you get subjected to that. There are lots of ways to do it, but you just need to cover it. Currently, the user fees collected are to be used for, and I quote, "the system of collection and conveyance, including pipes, conduits, mains, inlets, culverts, catch basins, gutters, ditches, channels, detention ponds, streets, curbs, drains, and all devices, appliances, and facilities appurtenant therefore, used for collecting, conducting, pumping, conveying, detaining, and/or treating stormwater." It's about collecting water and moving it around the township. It is not about reducing the volume of runoff and therefore avoiding the harms. That's what your user fee gets spent on, collecting the water and moving it around the township and dumping it on someone else at some other time. That is not about solving the problem. So you need to modify how those fees can be invested and how they can be used.
Where are you reading, Maya? Which section?
That is the definition of your stormwater system, I believe. So, yeah, the stormwater sewerage system. So
page 4.
the fund stormwater user fees get to be used for the stormwater sewerage system, and that's how the stormwater sewerage system is defined. So if, for example, you had a structural or a non-structural strategy that would avoid or reduce the volume of runoff, or a project that would address the harms from runoff, such as erosion, this ordinance would not allow you to use the fees on that project as written. It means that the fees could not be used for strategies avoiding runoff, such as removing existing impervious cover and replacing it with native pervious habitats. You couldn't use it for stream restoration projects that restore the carrying capacity of streams, not dredging them out, but restoring their natural carrying capacity and direct them on a natural flow path so they're not shooting into somebody's property in an unnatural way at an unnatural volume. You couldn't do stream bank restoration projects that are dealing with the erosion that's happening to public and private lands as the result of the increased volume and velocity of runoff, undermining infrastructure as well. You couldn't use the fees for floodplain restoration projects that are designed to restore and enhance the ability of floodplains to manage flows, volumes, peaks, velocities. All of that gets excluded. Just taking a look at that list that did go before the SAC, not looking at all the files, but just looking at how they're characterized on the list, I saw at least 4 projects that I think very arguably you can't use these fees for. The Stream Bank Stabilization Project at Gulf Creek Road, the Willow Woodland Stream Channel Stabilization, portions of the Lancaster Avenue Green Infrastructure Project, portions of the Wildhaven Road Traffic Calming Project. The language needs to be clarified. It needs to be very clear. You need to be able to use it for strategies that avoid runoff, for strategies, structural or non-structural, known to reduce flood flows, peaks, and damages, for projects that address the physical harms that have been created by the volume of runoff, the increased velocity, the increased peaks that are happening across Radnor Township. In my comment, I provide some examples of how other communities do that. I do think that you need to have some modifications in the fee structure. I absolutely believe that it might seem like a little bit of money, $50, $150 to many of us. Okay, but there are some people in the township for whom that's a hardship. And I really am very dissatisfied as a resident that we would not be caring and considerate of those members of our community for whom a fee of this nature is a genuine hardship. And I would like to see us remedy that and have fee forgiveness in those demonstrable situations. I also think, truthfully, that applying the fee to township properties and school district properties is kind of silly, because ultimately what's going to happen, township's going to pay the fee, school district's going to pay the fee, and what are they going to do to recoup that money? They're going to turn around and put it back on us in taxes or something. So let's just let them off the hook in the beginning and then structure our whole program, just, not having that hidden additional future cost. Right now, the credits program, so the giving credits, right, to get people to do good things to help the township. The credits program is for on-site treatment of stormwater runoff. That is a gross, gross oversight. If you work in the field of water, as you know I do, okay? Treatment generally, when you use that language, you're talking about water quality. You're talking about treating the water quality ramifications of stormwater. So the title of Section 10, which is the credits portion, says that it applies for on-site management, but the actual language provides credit for treatment of runoff, which in my world, in my eye, means treating pollution. I think treating pollution from stormwater runoff is hugely, hugely, hugely important, but it is not the only harm from runoff that we are trying to address here in Radnor Township. So I think that we need to modify the language in the credits program to make very clear that it can be used for strategies that remove impervious cover, for stream or stream bank restoration projects, for floodplain restoration, for things that reduce the volume of runoff, that reduce the harms of runoff, that do keep it on site and infiltrate it, that do all of those good things. But right now, the way I read this language, it doesn't accomplish that. And being a good attorney, right, one can of course make the argument, you can come back and say to a lot of these, well, Maya, I can argue that it would apply to an infiltration project, or it would apply, you know, the other elements of that I talked about would apply to infiltration, or that the credits program would apply to more than water quality. Sure, you can make the argument, but I'm sorry, also as a good attorney, you can make the argument to the contrary. And I think that there's a better chance that the contrary argument wins on all of these points. And why leave it to argument? Why don't we just fix the language now that I've alerted you to the fact that we have a problem? I do think that Commissioner Curley's point about equity, Commissioner Nagel's point about equity in the spending of these monies is very important. And I would say we are not simply trying to address flood damages to homes as a result of this project. Flood damages is a very significant concern, of course, but there are many, many more harms that result from the increasing volume and velocity and peaks associated with stormwater runoff, the erosion of public and private lands, the undermining of infrastructure, pollution that makes our creeks unsafe in the township and beyond the township. And so I think that we just need to recognize we're talking more about just flooded homes. And every one of the sub-watersheds in Radnor Township suffers harms from stormwater runoff, even if one might say, well, they don't have as many houses that flood. I think that you will find everybody is suffering equally from the ravages of inappropriate stormwater management here in Radnor Township, and everybody deserves to get the benefit of this user fee. It doesn't mean you have to divvy it all up equally. Of course, you want to spend a chunk on maintenance. Of course, you want to spend on projects that do affect us all, like the flooding in front of the firehouse. You know, we want everybody to be safe and for those fire trucks to be able to get out. But it is perfectly appropriate to somehow have some portion of those funds that can build up for a community and be used within their sub-watershed so they feel that direct benefit. And I agree with you absolutely, Commissioner Curley. I think it matters a lot in terms of the level of support that you're going to get for a program of this kind. And then just the final thing, I do think that the ordinance is missing a very important element, and that is including specific criteria for how the capital projects are going to be selected, and for how the success of those projects is going to be measured in order to inform how we pick projects in the present and how we're going to pick projects in the future, and being able to demonstrate and document for ourselves and for our community the values that they got out of the investment of the user fee. So I think all the way around, criteria for how to pick projects and criteria for how you're going to measure success are important. And I understand you may not want to do that specifically in the ordinance, but the ordinance could set up the structure, the committee that would down the road, like with the credits program, actually lay out the specifics, but include in here that that's a mandate, an expectation that you will have as a result of the passage of this ordinance. And I do think that some sort of advisory committee, I didn't have it in my comments, but I do think an advisory committee that actually genuinely would look at project proposals and provide a forum for discussion by the community on that level a new, not the EAC, but a new advisory committee that actually had the charge that I think some people thought that that it did have with regards to evaluating projects. I think that could be extremely valuable. The Citizens Advisory Committee that you had for this program, I was a participant. I went to every meeting. The one or two meetings I missed, I sent a member of my staff because I was participating as the Delaware Riverkeeper. So I or my counterpart was there for every single meeting, and I can tell you that meeting was not about public participation. It was not about getting people engaged. It was about having that committee give feedback on the concept of a fee. So I just think we need to have clarity, but to have a citizens committee that actually did look at and evaluate and prioritize or help to prioritize projects that come forth to the commissioners, I think would be a very valuable process for all. So I thank you for the opportunity to comment, and I do apologize for not having more copies of my comment, but you all have faster photocopiers than I do.
Well, thank you. Those are very good comments, and we'll make sure everyone receives these. Okay. Do we have other residents who would like to participate in the conversation tonight? Well, for any of you who are watching at home, please do participate in this conversation. You'll have another opportunity Thursday night, as I said at the beginning of this meeting, as well as the 12th of September, and in future meetings at this board level as well. Okay, does anybody have any thoughts in wrapping this up that they'd like to share on the board?
So let's make a decision on that watershed approach idea and then just not revisit it.
No,
Or
I'm
choose to
not
revisit
really
if that's
ready
what-
to make a
Okay,
decision
fair
on
enough.
it. So,
Well, I would just say to Maya von Rossum that this is wonderful ideas,
yeah.
but we'd have to spend a lot more time to incorporate all your concepts into this ordinance. We'd have to study them. We'd have to have input, and I don't want to wait. I want to get this ordinance passed. And if it needs supplementing, augmenting, improvements, we'll do that. But I don't want to go back, turn back the clock and try to incorporate all the comments, all the concepts you've articulated. I just don't want to do it.
In fact, in many instances, you'll see I actually provided language that you could incorporate. I think they're actually very simple fixes. And just with all due, I appreciate what you're saying, Commissioner Higgins, you want to get it done. But the fact of the matter is, we're not just looking to collect money from people to move water around. We're looking to solve problems here in Radnor Township. And that's what this ordinance should be about. And so I would hope that you would take the opportunity to hear my comments and the comments coming at the upcoming meetings, because I'm sure you'll have some great ideas there, and make this ordinance what we want it to be and what we need it to be, because otherwise you will be facing opposition, including from me.
Okay, so the timing issue is going to be a continued issue that we can all recognize we're going to have some conflict about, and we'll continue to have conflict about, but we will incorporate. The whole point of having public input is so that we can make changes if they're merited. So I don't want anyone to think that because we're in a rush to do this, that this is all just an exercise in futility, soliciting people's input and advice. There is opportunity. We can make changes. Okay.
Can I make a brief comment?
Yes.
Sorry. Maya, thank you for coming out tonight, and thank you for your other correspondence that you'd given the board back in July. Very helpful. I agree that the system is not just about addressing stormwater, but it's about education, it's about best management practices, and really the goal, the long-time goal, will be to change behavior and to change the practices that lead to large amounts of runoff. And I think ultimately the ordinance will probably get amended several times to incorporate many of your concerns and comments. But in the essence of getting something passed sooner, we may move forward with language that we're seeing, maybe some changes. But I agree that, but I just want to make an important comment. I too agree that we needed to have a methodology of giving credits. And this is, I think when we began this conversation 2 years ago, I talked about credits, about incentivizing good behavior so that we encourage best management practices and reduce impervious coverage to begin with. So to that end, Section 10 does allow us, it does encourage us to implement procedures by subsequent resolutions. So it allows us to do it by resolution, so we don't need to do it by ordinance. So I expect that a follow-up to the ordinance, when we eventually do pass it, would be a resolution, maybe in a few meetings later, to more clearly define the credits. I do want to make a comment, and Commissioner Schaefer, I'm not sure if you were planning on discussing the rate of the billing unit. I'm in favor of keeping the billing unit at the current number, regardless of what seed money we put into this. We have to recognize, at least from my point of view, that this stormwater management has been underfunded annually since it started raining, whenever that was. So the point is that this cash infusion that we're talking about should be in addition to the funding level that we looked at. We all agree that the projects and the costs are far greater than anything we can fund at this time. So, you know, taking $10 off, if anything, is only going to hurt us in the long run. I think it's important to keep the fee schedule at about where it is at the $56 per unit. And then, as quickly as we can, get the credit system in place so we can reward those who have implemented BMPs and who have done things to reduce their runoff in the first place. So that's just my comment on the fees. So thank you.
You know, interestingly, we have not had a lot of pushback on the fee. So, you know, so we'll see what happens in the next few meetings and if we get that kind of feedback. And I personally, in my emails, have not, it hasn't, the negative feedback hasn't been about the level of the fee. It's been about the fee, period, at, you know, 2 cents or $20 or $200. But, you know, that's another, we'll continue to have the conversation. We'll continue to solicit feedback about, you know, whether that fee is at an appropriate level. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this off for tonight. As we said, there are plenty more opportunities to talk about it, and if you don't feel like coming to a public meeting because you don't like to speak in public or whatnot, please reach out to one of whoever your commissioner is or any of the commissioners and have your opinion registered. Okay, we have 2 more items to cover tonight. The next is item 8, which is the Township Administration's recommendation as to the 2013 trash fee. And I'm going to pass this on to our Township Manager, Bob Zinkowski, to give us a little background on what this is about.
Sure, Commissioner, thank you. One of the things we've been looking at here is with the trash fee is getting prepared to be able to get the billing ready, and knowing that we've looked at the different revenues that have been coming in for the township right now. There's been a slight 6-ton uptick year to date on recyclables that we are recycling a little bit more. That this is something we're looking at right now, proposing to the board here shortly of the elimination of this fee or suspending this fee for this year. Bill, I'll let you add to that.
Yeah, just briefly, is going back to our budget discussions as we were putting the 2013 budget together, we had spent a lot of time talking about the increase that Delaware County was imposing upon everyone who contributes to the district, including the township, and that it seemed like a good idea, or prudent anyway, to pass that fee along to the end users. So that was the genesis for the fee itself. We had talked, when the board initially approved implementing the fee, that as long as it was administratively feasible and something that could be attached to the real estate bill or some other bill that the township was already sending out. Well, we ran into issues right away with that with the county, and that the fee was not adopted until after the county needed that information to put on the real estate tax bill. And then based on software limitations, we couldn't add it to the sewer rent bill. So basically, as it stands now, it would have to be a standalone invoice, which obviously makes that very unadministratively feasible and probably, for most residents, not something they want to see coming in the mail. So I think given the revenue uptick that the manager just spoke about and the administrative difficulties, The township has more than enough revenue this year to cover the fee or the expense imposed by Delaware County, so at this time suspending it for 13.
So Bill, if it was in existence for 2014, when do you have to get the information over to the county?
They needed it in early November to attach
So that's prior
the-
to us passing our budget?
Yeah, that's going to continue to be a problem on the
Right,
real
okay.
estate tax bill.
Right, so seems like,
More than likely, you're going to see that in the budget that we are probably going to propose, that it not be enacted in 14.
seems like we have no ability to ever enact it unless.
Well, we do if we decide in 14 that we're going to do this in 15, then we would have some decision that would be able to be made on that.
I see what you, so we would pass it as part of the 14 budget with it being effective, communicated to the county in the end of the year in time for them to bill it.
More than likely,
For the 15.
more than likely, we're not going to recommend
No,
for
I understand, but I
14's
just wanted to
budget.
understand whether or not, how it would ever be possible, given the timing, because we don't pass the budget till December.
We would have those discussions probably sometime during 14, so that we have a decision made probably sometime late summer.
Do we anticipate that Delaware County is going to raise that fee again in 2014?
I'm not sure, they didn't let us know the last time, so I wouldn't
We don't
know
know.
if that would be the case, but we think, again, based on the revenues and that we would ask the board that we would come back with a resolution at the first meeting in September to suspend that fee.
Okay, and you mentioned there's been an uptick in the recycling.
Yes,
Do you
you're-
know, do you have like the dollar figure that would be associated with that?
Unfortunately, the revenue is down based on the recyclable market, but we know
Oh.
that the tonnage is up.
Okay,
So actually, folks are doing that, which basically that's six, I know it's not a lot, but it's movement in the right direction, where actually we've got 6 more tons of recyclables out there. And again, that's part of that educational component that we continue to keep working on. That's going to be a big part of that.
okay. So we're not to take action on this tonight, or,
We would like to bring a resolution at the next meeting,
At
if
the
that's
next
okay with the board.
okay. Any objection to that? All right. Finally, we are going to move to number 11, which is the preview of our 2014 proposed budget.
And I will lead with that. And
Okay.
this one will be relatively short and sweet as well. Again, based with a lot of the information we just talked about, the trash fee, based on our revenues of where we are, based on, again, the controlling of costs. We know that there was some additional one-time revenue that we know that the board will be looking at here with the $8 million. It is my intention to bring to the board a 0% tax increase for 2014. The department heads are just the initial part of their budget, starting to prepare that. But again, those departments have all been made aware internally of where we are looking to go this year, and we think that that's going to be the appropriate approach here moving into 2014 with the budget.
0% is good.
Short and sweet.
No complaints about that.
Anyone who argues against you right now is committing political suicide. Just a question, Bob. We know that, we have the cost of living increases on the contracts. We have, just in general, costs going up. Whereas this 8% $8 million windfall is a one-time income. Is it other incomes that are going up that are leading you to this
Yes.
decision? It's not just this $8 million?
That's correct, that's correct.
Okay.
But it's also very difficult when you see a large chunk of money come to the township and say,
Sure.
oh, by the way, we're still going to go ahead and do that. We think that, again, with the revenues being up, and I think that's something that I know with finance and with Bob Tate have done a nice job of looking at this. I think even our CARFAC, and Bill, correct me here if I'm wrong, are these some of these trends that we're seeing that, we can start incorporating these, or are these certain trends that we should be very leery of? And again, I think we've always come from a conservative budget that we do not want to go ahead and put out revenues that we don't think we'll ever achieve. So I think as part of this, we're looking at, again, the stormwater fee on top of it, these other numbers that hit residents that I think we want to be able to try to control our costs. And again, continue to look at how we operate as well.
Kevin, are you happy to hear this? Kevin Higgins. This is good news, right?
Well, again, I want to see what happens with the stormwater management fee, because you can, again, I have great faith in Bill and Bob, but you can basically create a stealth tax increase through the storm management fee. So I want to see how the monies get moved.
Stealth tax increase, I'm going to have to research that.
Okay, that's it for what's on the agenda. Do we have any public comment?
Well, before you do, I have something. Steve Norsini? I've gotten several calls and went over and checked it out myself. Then you and I spoke about the cleanup along the stream in the Willows. And I have no problem with what you told me. It makes sense. But I would think that you might be able to avert some further discussions and calls to the commissioners if you could explain what's going on there.
Thank you, Commissioner Nagel. Yes, recently Public Works crews have been working along the stream, and there's been some no-mow zones there for years, and there was not much rhyme or reason. A lot of them had gotten very large, a lot of invasive species, and little or no maintenance was done within those areas. So what we've done is we've cut down the growth back to the stream. We've removed invasive growth. We've left all the stumps of whatever weed trees or dead trees that were there. They stayed in place to help hold the stream bank. And we've limbed up trees, removed vines, and have done that to both sides of the stream with the full intent of letting a riparian buffer grow back in another no-mow zone, if you will, along those banks. And we'll be moving forward in that fashion. So it may look a little stark now, but it was long overdue. You know, there was quite a crop of Phragmites down by Darby-Paoli Road. A lot of them were removed. A lot of other invasive vines, bushes, prickers, and so forth. So we're still doing, we finish along the stream. We're going to do some more work in amongst the body of trees. But again, the full intent is along the stream, a buffer will be reinstated along that area.
Thank you. And Bob, for the future, not that you would need the approval, but I think it would be a really good idea before you do this specific type of project to talk to the EAC and Parks Board. We did a lot of work on that stream under 2 state grants that I wrote. And we, restructured the banks and planted a tremendous amount. So if nothing else, it would just be a courtesy to let those groups be aware of what's going on.
Okay, will do.
Okay, any public comment?
Sarah Pilling from Garrett Hill, but I've got on my Skunk Hollow Community Garden hat. I would have preferred to have done this at the beginning of the meeting, but you did not have public participation. We are in the garden thanks to your indulgence. We are using it well. We have 57 families this year who are probably providing food for another 100 to 150 families. We have collected for Philabundance. It's being delivered to Linvilla Orchards this year, and they are so impressed with this that they have just contacted us and want to provide free plants, seedlings for us for next year because we've made such an enormous contribution to Philabundance in Delaware County. It goes down to loaves and fishes, and then it's given to the underserved in the lower part of Delaware County. We have performed education. We've had Agnes Irwin, the Ithan Elementary School Brownies, the Haverford School Boys, and in a totally surprising move, we were contacted by Whole Foods in Devon, who saw our Facebook page and went to our website, and they're sending 40 people to the garden on the Saturday, the 7th of September, to help us clean it up for fall. It has come to my attention, and I communicated with Bob today, but I want it to go on the record. There was a rumor circulating that the township was going to take the garden from us and give it to Conroy Catering. And so rather than let this float and cause a lot of anxiety in the gardeners, we put a lot of love, sweat, and tears into the garden. I contacted Bob today, and this is what he wrote me, and I want it in the record. Good morning, Sarah. This is a new one on me. There is no truth to that rumor. The garden is yours, and those involved have done an incredible job, and it looks fantastic. I hope this helps. Thank you for reaching out to me, because it would be a terrible disservice if we were denied the use of that garden. It is an extraordinary project, and despite the weather, the late spring, and the most unbelievable volume of bugs that I have ever seen, we've had a very bountiful year. Thank you.
And one thing we definitely have here in Radnor is a very healthy rumor mill. So Thank you for confirming the truth of that. And it's a very good policy when you hear rumors like that to check the source, because usually they're not true. So with that, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we're adjourned.